Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Deku Was Reincarnated for Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The event that took place during the summer training camp had produced results that no one foresaw. 11 injuries, ranging from minor to severe. 13 were injured. 1 had gone missing. The entire city, maybe even world, had taken the event and mucked up a mass media storm. How could UA, a school that was supposed to train future heroes, allow something like this to happen? Of course, the media was only interested in what would rile people up. All they heard was villains and kidnapped, and they went to have their own field day. This time was different than the villain attack Class 1 had over at USJ, where they had all been able to escape with minimal injuries. This time they had not. In fact, it was very possible a good amount of students could have died. Not only that, but a student had gone missing. No, 14 of Class 1A, Izuku Midoriya. While everyone had voiced their concerns, worries, and fears, it was the people who had saw him right before the kidnapping that made them think the worst. Izuku Midoriya was in critical condition. His limbs had been torn and bruised from overusing his quirk. The only reason he had gotten as far as he did was because of adrenaline. Now that he was in the clutches of the League of Villain, in such a state no less, would they show mercy on him? Every single one of Class 1A's students had those thoughts circling in their minds. Class 1A, minus Toru Hagakure, Kaiu Kajiru, Momo Yaoyorozu, and of course Izuku Midoriya, had all gathered inside of Katsuki Bakugou's hospital room. The boy had bandages around his hands, his brows furrowed deeply at them instead of acknowledging his classmates who had come in to wish him recovery. Minta was holding a bag of bell peppers for Bakugo. "We got you some bell peppers," he spoke up, slicing through the thick silence. No responses. The class could only stare at each other in the awkward air. It wasn't until Ijiru Kirishima walked up to Bakugo's bedside, placing a hand on the railing and a fist forming in the other. "Look, this time around, let's save him." The sudden exclamation caused Bakugo to spin his head around and look at his classmate, dead in the eyes. Bakugo's mind began reeling. Thoughts of what had happened began playing back, vividly in front of him. Kiochan. He couldn't see anything in that moment. He was trapped in some orb or whatever. But he could clearly hear that brat's annoying voice scream out his dumb nickname. Stupid Deku. What could he do anyways? At a blink of an eye, there was a loud bursting pop noise and Bakugo was back in the forest, stumbling backwards. He could only take in his surroundings for a few seconds, though it seemed like an eternity. People were behind and in front of him. His classmates who, for the love of God, he's never really known by name, were catching both his and Takoyami's fall as they both were released from their ball imprisonment. The villains in front of him were retreating back into the black, misty portal except in one of their arms was Deku. The villain had his hand at Deku's throat, keeping a strong grip on his shoulder as well. Bakugo had noticed beforehand that the tentacle guy was carrying Deku around for a while, and the reason was evident. The amount of strain and injuries he received on his body was massive, absolutely destructive. Bakugo knew his quirk's limits, but obviously Deku didn't, or he chose to ignore them. Again, an idiot. His brain finally caught up to speed as he watched Deku be taken by the villains in his stead. Bakugo's arm went out, flickers of explosions readying itself desperately as the villains retreated. "Deku!" he screamed out. In that instant, only he saw the lights reflecting in Izuku's eyes. Glimmers of tears accompanied a small, shaky smile. "Kachin, I'm so glad." The boy whispered softly, maybe low enough to make sure he didn't heard, but he fucking heard it. And with that, the portal closed. The students was left in the forests by themselves, taking in the utter defeat. Anger, frustration, concern, more anger, and also some anger had whirled around in Bakugo's chest. He was never one to express his emotions honestly, and not to strangers even if they were classmates at the very least. He didn't know what he wanted at the moment. Everything about the night seemed like a really bad dream. "Look, Todoroki and I were here yesterday, and we happened to hear a conversation with Yaoyorozu and..." Kirishima rubbed the back of his head while Todoroki took the lead to explain. He looked down at Bakugo, meeting fiery eyes with his cool ones. "She placed a tracking device on one of those monsters. Yaoyorozu is giving the police one to track them down," he explained softly as the other classmates listened. Tenya-8, or who Bakugo considered as Fast Four Eyes, had grabbed a hold of both Kirishima and Todoroki's shoulders. "We can't. This is a matter we should leave to the professionals. This isn't something we as students should be meddling in." He nearly screamed out, but a chorus of hushing noises helped Ida catch his voice. Kirishima could only grimace and clutch at his chest. "Damn it, man, I know that. But I still couldn't do anything." "You didn't either." The jab caught Ada stricken. Both students clenched their fists. "We heard Bakugo was being targeted, but we couldn't do anything. I didn't do anything about it. And everyone got hurt and Midoriya got..." He stopped himself, swallowing hard. "If I don't do something about it here, then I won't be able to call myself a hero." Everyone around had tried to hush the students until he turned back to Bakugo. Listen, everyone knows you and Midoriya's got some weird beef or whatever, but you've known him the longest, right? He risked his life to save yours, so it's only right that we go and save him. The class went quiet. Bakugo went back to stare at his hands, pondering, aggressively thinking. He too stayed quiet, since he had no idea what to say or what his honest self was telling him. His mind grew dizzy again. The reality of the situation was more than he could ever take in. The class only waited for Bakugo's response, but he had already tuned everyone out. Visions of the past played once again. Kachin, are you hurt? Can you get up? Shut up, Deku. Because I couldn't just stand around and watch you die. Shut up. Deku. Kachin, I'm so glad. A roar of anguish filled the room as Bakugo clenched his bandaged fists and banged them down on the bed repeatedly. The entire class jumped in shock. Some even escaped out of the room. He continued to beat his hands down again and again, each time with more vigor fueled by hatred. Every fucking time he goes and pulls some shit like this. I didn't ask for fucking help and he looks at me like I'm some weakling that needs saving. I would have been fine if they took me. So if he's all powerful and great, then he should be able to get himself out of that shit. I ain't gonna help that son of a bitch, he can die for all I care. He screamed out. Bakugo's face was towards the bed, but every single one of the classmates still inside the room had felt the vicious, frontal attack from where they were. The shocked silence was broken by footsteps approaching Bakugo's bed and a hard slap. Uraraka's eyes brimmed with tears, but her eyebrows furrowed in anger and disgust. Whether you wanted it or not, Deku risked everything to save you. That's something a real hero would do. And if you're going to look down on that, then you should quit now. You're not hero material. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she turned and stormed out of the room, followed by a few of the other classmates until only Kirishima stayed there next to Bakugo's side. He didn't move from when Uraraka slapped him. The time to be furious had passed. Deep down, Bakugo knew he didn't mean what he said, at least not the last part. He was always one to talk about killing and death, but never would he choose to take someone's life. Bakugo was being defensive. There were too many people there and he wasn't able to share how he really felt. If Deku did die then, Bakugo, Kirishima whispered softly. He turned his head to look up at him. I know that. You don't mean that. Whether you come or not, me and Todoroki are leaving tonight. His words became softer, Kirishima's eyes looking to the ground as well. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you don't care about him. But he sure as hell cared about you and he's our classmate and friend. I'm still inviting you because, well, I think you do want to rescue him too. Bakugo turned his face away from the redhead. Get out. Kirishima blinked in surprise before sighing, rubbing the back of his neck. He turned on his heels to the door and with one look at Bakugo, he left. It was true though, he did want to rescue Deku. He didn't want Kirishima to see him blink away frustrated tears before letting them out with a cry. Bakugo had taken the party by surprise when he met with the students outside of the hospital. Kirishima's face had lit up, giving him a bright grin as they discussed what their plan of action was. The rescue team was Kirishima, Todoroki, Bakugo, Yaoyorozu, and even Ida. While the class president was there to persuade them to stop what they were doing, he was convinced by the idea of a non-combat rescue mission and a quick chat with Todoroki. No one really heard what they were talking about, out of privacy, but Bakugo was able to hear Todoroki softly say, you know, if you were the one kidnapped, he'd try to rescue you. Everyone in class knew that Deku's friends were mainly Ida and Uraraka, and even though Bakugo didn't know this, it seemed like the bonds Deku had made were as strong as steel. Bakugo wondered, if it were anyone else, would Ida have agreed to come along despite the potential risks? He answered it with a no. With Yaoyorozu's tracking device, they pinpointed the chip to be located in the Kamino ward. The bullet train ride to the region was awkward, filled with a kind of silence that was only broken up by discussion between Ida and Todoroki. They sat across from each other, and while Todoroki and Kirishima were eating at their store-bought meals, Ida expressed his position as watchman to all of them. I want all of you to remember what we're doing is extremely dangerous and that we are to avoid combat at all cost. He had directed most of the speeches to Bakugo, who only grunted and sneered in response. Listen up, Four Eyes. I don't give a shit about what you say, but I'm not going to run in without a plan. Bakugo crossed his arms and glared him down, which only gave Ida more fuel to spout his speeches. Everyone knew him to be the person with the least likeliness to cooperate, but he wasn't an idiot. Bakugo understood it was virtually impossible to achieve their mission without relying on each other. Much to his dismay, they all had ended up with a disguise. Dumb disguises is what Bakugo thought as he tugged on his collar and scratched at the beanie they had him put on. He was ready to tear apart the sunglasses and fake goatee until Kirishima had reassured he looked like a super cool dude. Bakugo left it alone but nearly socked Kirishima in the face when he tried to get him to do some sort of accent. All four of them walked towards the tracking point's location, with Ida constantly reminder of to not engage in any form of combat, in order to keep suspicion from the regular pedestrians. They all had crammed themselves into the side of the building the tracking device had pointed to. Kirishima had brought out a night vision camera and hoisted himself on top of Todoroki's shoulders. Bakugo followed, stepping onto Ida's shoulders despite his unwillingness. When they saw that only Naumas were inside of the facility, everyone's heart sank. While no one knew what the Naumas were, from the many they've fought and seen, everyone understood that they weren't normal. Was it possible that Deku was inside of this facility as well? With the Naumas, everything that occurred next happened in a blink of an eye. Mount Lady had come with other pro-heroes and police enforcement to smash the building down and rescue and retain those that were inside the building. The destruction left the 5 of them stunned, scrambling up on the ledge to see what was happening. Mount Lady, gang the Orca, even no 4-hero best genist is there, Kirishima shouted. As the pro-heroes rounded up all the Naumas and rescued those who were taken, Ida announced that they should all leave it to them and head back now. He seemed far too happy to leave, but Bakugo stayed put. There was something off. Something in the air was telling Bakugo that it wasn't going to be this easy. Something inside Bakugo's stomach churned, and before he knew it, wham, if possible, I'd like to ask for you all to stop interfering. The aura around them dropped. It was almost as if they had come face to face with the Reaper themselves. All 5 of them had their backs to the wall. The entire block had been destroyed in 1 second. The sound of slow clapping lingered as the man in the dark praised best genist, as expected of the No. 4 hero. I was trying to blast everyone away, but in an instant you controlled everyone's clothes and pulled them out of the way. Your judgment, your technique, you've got nerve of steel. Isn't that so, Izuku? Bakugo froze. Every single of them had heard what the man had said, yet no one's body would move. Every single one of them was paralyzed by fear, Bakugo included. Yaoyorozu had vomited to the side. That's definitely best genist for you. Not only does he have a versatile quirk that can affect anyone who's wearing clothes, he's also known for his swift judgment. The voice was Izuku Midoriya's. Every single one of them recognized it. It was Bakugo who finally turned his head to see Deku standing there, next to the man in the dark suit. He looked fine. His injuries were gone. He was smiling like he was back at school with his friends, but something was off. Deku was in his hero outfit, but wasn't at the same time. It was a darker, black version of what he wore with modifications. While his face still seemed soft, there was something about his eyes that made him look tired. Black liquid began forming and spilling out villains, those specifically from the League. The guy with the hands, Bakugo remembered it was something like Shigaraki, landed in front of the man who seemed to be death himself. Tamura, I know your goal was to take the Bakugo boy, but I'd like you to know you did not fail with your replacement. The man placed a hand onto Deku's shoulder. Bakugo was ready to stand up and run over when Ida placed a hand on him, shaking his head as he covered his own mouth. He gritted his teeth, hands balling into fists as he stood there, watching like some sort of bystander. You've actually found us the key to success. With Izuku, we can finally rip apart one for all. Shigaraki Tamura only slouched himself, scratching at his neck. Sensei, I didn't know you had such tremendous power. Before he could say anything else, All Might had appeared and tried to land a hit on the man. The fight ensured. Bakugo couldn't keep an eye on everything that was going on, from the man, to All Might, to Tamura, to Deku. I want you to remember, Tamura, you can still grow so much more. My gift to you is this boy. He will be the key to your success. With his fingers, it zipped over to the unconscious Warp Gate villain, forcing his quirk to activate. Izuku, go with Tamura. But, Sensei, Deku looked up at him before All Might came back. Oh, no you don't. I'll be rescuing Midoriya. The man fended off All Might, throwing him onto his back. The Warp Gate grew larger as the suited man used whatever his quirk was to pull the villains into the Black Warp Gate. Before any of them could get in, Bakugo finally sprung up and over the wall. Deku, he screamed out, using his explosions to propel himself towards the gate. All Might turned towards Bakugo, shocked before he yelled out, Bakugo, get back now. Before he knew it, Deku's body jolted forward towards Bakugo despite the magnetism and punched him square in the face. He hit the wall, cracking the cement as the other students jumped over the wall to assist him. The man turned towards them. Oh, Izuku, is this the boy you've been telling me about? Deku nodded in response, a grin appearing on his face. Yeah, this is Kachin, he replied. The man only chuckled, turning back to All Might. Very well, Tamura, I'll send Izuku to you soon. I'm sure right now he has his own battle to face. With that, Tamura and the other villains were pulled into the Black Warp Gate, leaving Izuku Midoriya standing there, grinning towards Katsuki Bakugou. All Might's voice rang through the battleground. What did you do to him? One hero ran towards the man, throwing a punch which was blocked. Not much, really. I only tweaked with some memories. Don't worry though, he still idolizes you. I couldn't get rid of that. The man chuckled and black lines from his fingertip charged at All Might. Izuku, I'll let you have your fight. Thank you, Sensei. Deku's face lit up, almost like a child who was given permission to eat another cookie. It pissed off Bakugo. What the fuck, Deku? What's wrong with you? Brainwashed, huh? just do the thing you did back at the sports festival and snap out of it. Bakugo screamed out, his personal rage fueling him to act without thinking. Ida and Kirishima had helped him back up, all of them keeping their eyes on Deku. Todoroki called out after him, "Midoriya, we're here to rescue you. Whatever's going on, you can pull through." Deku only blinked in confusion as the man laughed while fighting All Might. The destruction from the two's fight was overwhelming, but there was nothing the UA students could do unless they wanted to leave behind Deku. I don't know who you are, but it seems like you know me. I didn't know Kachin had friends." Deku furrowed his brow, fists clenching. "Wow, that's really amazing, huh, Kachin? It's been only a year since we've seen each other and you're here with friends, while I'm alone." Bakugo's eyes widen. What the fuck was going on? Yaoyorozu placed a hand on his shoulder. "He doesn't know us, only you, Bakugo. I think he definitely is brainwashed in some way, but there could be more to this," she explained, biting her lip as she watched her classmate slowly turn his smile into a frown. "He still has his personality. Talk to him, Midoriya's one to talk." Bakugo didn't want to fucking talk. He wanted to really punch Deku in the face right now. Yaoyorozu was right though. There seemed to have been some kind of brainwash in play. If it was similar to Shinsu's brainwashing, then that means there must be some sort of limit or trigger to release the quirk. The others seemed to have realized that too, so the best form of action right now was to keep Midoriya talking, maybe even taunt him closer. It would be risky and any assurance of the mission being non-combat was out the window. "You said a year, huh? I don't even remember the last time we saw each other. You're just that small to me," Bakugo yelled out, grinning as he got his hands ready. That seemed to bring Deku's face back to a soft, nervous look. Ida, on the other hand, was not as pleased. "Do you remember back in middle school? We both were applying to UA and you told me that I couldn't do anything since I was quirkless." Deku looked down and clenched his fists. "And then, do you remember what you told me? You said, hey, I know a way for you to get a quick. Maybe if you jump off the school roof you can die and be reborn with a quirk." Bakugo's face dropped. His classmates turned to look at him, terrified. Did you say that to him?" Todoroki whispered softly. The silence and then the sound of a swallow gave them the answer. "Well, I wasn't going to at first, but as I was walking home I got taken by a villain, a sludge monster. All Might came to save me actually, and I asked him, you know, me and you look up to him so much, and he was there in front of me. So I had to ask if it was possible I could still be a hero even without a quirk." All Might had heard every word and tried to call out to him but was silenced by Sensei and the destruction going around. He told me I couldn't. And deep down I knew that too, but for some reason I felt that All Might would have told me that. Maybe I could have been. So I went back to school, went up to the roof and did exactly what you told me to do. Deku looked up to stare at Bakugo, dead on. "I didn't die, but I was reborn. Sensei found me and he told me that I could be a hero. Then he gave me a quirk. So now I can be a hero. And to prove it, I'm going to defeat you, Kachin." Deku clenched his fists and charged towards the students. Kachin, stunned, quickly got into a stance to take him on. For the first time though, he wasn't able to smile. Before either of them could do anything, Todoroki placed up a giant wall of ice to keep Deku from coming. "If he doesn't know us, he won't know our quirk. We have to leave now," he explained sternly to his classmates, ushering them up. "What? No, I can beat him. I'll knock him out and then we'll take him back." Bakugo screamed as the ice shattered, a fist coming through it. Todoroki quickly used his flames to melt the shards that were flung by the impact. None of them were in their hero outfits. It was too dangerous to fight, especially with All Might and the man having their destructive battle so close. "We need to go, now," Todoroki yelled out, pulling them all back. Deku stared at all of them, causing all of them to freeze as their hearts dropped. In that instant, Izuku Midoriya looked like he was ready to kill. "I'm not letting you go that easy, Kachin." Another fist came down but was blocked by Kirishima's arm. There was a cracking noise as Kirishima yelled out in pain. "Fuck, he's too strong." The hardening wore off and was replaced with a bruised, bloodied arm. Bakugo looked at it, gritting his teeth. There was no other option. They had to get out of there. "It'll be okay. They'll get out, regroup, they'll rescue Deku later. He was alive and that's what was important, even if the fucking idiot got himself brainwashed. But now, they had to leave in order to give All Might a chance to win." "Everyone look away." Bakugo held his hands close, pointing out towards Deku. Everyone turned as he unleashed a concentrated explosion at Deku, who blocked it with his arms. The boy flew back onto the ground as Bakugo grabbed a hold of Ida's shirt. "Fucking go," he cried out, Ida nodding in response. They all grabbed onto Ida as he used his quirk to swiftly get out of the area of action. "Oh no you don't." Deku gotten up and jumped towards them, a fist ready to land when all of a sudden All Might appeared to block the punch. "Get out of here. I'll take care of the rest." All Might grabbed onto Deku's hand and punched him in the face, sending him flying backwards once again. "I'm sorry Midoriya, my boy." He turned towards the children who have raced off, away from the action and into the streets. No one knew how long it took them to get away so quickly. But everyone's minds began reeling as they were stuck in a crowd who were being escorted by police officers and other traffic control mediators. No one said a word to one another as they were being funneled into the main streets as helicopters flew in every direction towards the fight. Everyone directed themselves towards the screens up on high buildings as they went from whatever commercial they were playing to the fight at hand. From high above, they were able to see both All Might and Deku. His voice was low, but audible when projected on the loudspeakers. "You were my hero. I've always wanted to be like you, All Might, so why didn't you tell me I could be a hero?" he screamed out, getting his fists ready. The man in dark suit came over, placing a hand onto Deku's shoulder. All Might grimaced deeply, his fist shaking. "No, Midoriya, that's not what happened," he yelled out. How could All For One erase all of the memories from that point? How was he able to implant new ones? Who had that ability, and what were the ways to dispel the effects? All Might continued to reach out to Deku. "You can be a hero. You are a hero. Izuku Midoriya. I know you." His eyes widened, tears glistening. "All Might, you're only saying that now cause I'm in front of you, with a quirk, with a power. Why didn't you tell me that before?" Deku screamed out. He ran toward him but was quickly stopped by All For One. "That's enough for you, Izuku. Go back to Tamura." He placed a warp gate behind them as Izuku reluctantly got in. "Sensei, what about you?" His voice shook before All For One looked back to All Might. "Whatever happens to me, Tamura will succeed me. Help him." Deku nodded his head and went into the gate. No, All Might raced towards the warp gate but was stopped when All For One aimed a destructive blow towards a civilian. At the last second, All Might turned to protect the woman, and then lost his form. Bakugo watched the events unfold. He listened to words like successor and All For One and didn't understand anything that was going on. Even when All Might's true form was revealed, he cried out for him to win. As other heroes came to help and lighten the load, Bakugo heard the man say something but the speakers cut off. Only All Might heard this in the moment. "Izuku Midoriya, the boy you passed it to, To be honest, I was going to kill him and make him feel every bit ounce of regret. But the opportunity presented itself. Isn't it sweeter to see the boy who was going to be your successor fall into my hands? I'll be honest, when I saw him, I swear he was my younger brother for a second." He laughed. "It won't matter what the results are now. You lose either way. To be a teacher is to help your pupil stand up by himself. It seems you haven't been doing that good of a job. It might have been a result from your previous teacher." The last moment of the fight gave an incredulous explosion. It ended with a United States of smash. It ended with one fist raised into the air. It ended with cheers from every part of the nation. It was victory. Victory for everyone else except the chosen few. If Izuku Midoriya had been watching next to him, Bakugo was certain he'd be crying endless amount of tears. He wasn't there, however, which meant what the five of them ultimately had sought to do ended in a complete failure. The next morning the world was in a state of chaos. Bakugo and the others had all gone their separate ways, quiet, deep in thought, and in mourning. Everyone had been able to go back home to their families, except for Deku. The road to his house was familiar to Bakugo, walking past it every time he went to elementary school in the past and on the occasions where he had come over to grab Deku for their daily adventures as children. As he walked past the Midoriya's household, he couldn't help but see the police vehicles lined up outside. He knew what that meant. He could also hear Deku's mom crying loudly, begging for help from the police who were trying to reassure her the best to their abilities. Bakugo grabbed at his shirt, gripping it tightly as he gritted his teeth. He tried to keep walking but stopped a few feet away from the house. He doubled over, eyes brimming but refusing to let them stream. He held his breath behind pulled back teeth. Bakugo wasn't going to scream. He didn't need to as the sound of Inko Midoriya's wails of sorrow echoed through the neighborhood. He wasn't strong enough to save Deku. They had to run away like pathetic losers. Bakugo didn't know what was a better scenario. The fact that Deku could be dead versus Deku being brainwashed into a villain. If it was him, he'd rather be dead than turn villain. Of course he'd fight his ways out first, but would rather die trying than anything else. To be forced into being a villain, now that was something that set him off. It was disgusting. Bakugo would have never admitted out loud, but Deku's passion for becoming the best hero rivaled his own. It wasn't the first time Izuku Midoriya sat next to Shigaraki Tamura. So close and so threatening. This time, the boy some people called Deku was sitting in a wooden chair, his hands and legs restraining back as Tamura pulled up a bar chair and sat in front of him. This time was different than the first for obvious reasons, but the main struggle ran through Deku's mind. How do I get out of this situation? There are no civilians that Tamura could threaten Deku with, but there are about 5 other villains that loomed over him, watching every single one of his movements. It wasn't like he could move much anyways. Deku was starting to feel all of the pain that had saved itself for a time. He wasn't running around fueled on a great heaping pile of adrenaline. He was in no condition to fight. Well, this isn't what I wanted. Not at all. Tamura's head dipped low, a hand moving back to scratch his neck idly. But now that you're here, I'm sure we can figure something out. Deku kept his head low, thinking of a strategy as he waited. There wasn't much for him to do at that moment since there were so many villains surrounding him and he didn't know all of their quirks. He knew for certain that Tamura in front of him could disintegrate once he got all his fingers wrapped around him. Okay, avoid his hands. But the bartender over to the side with the mist floating around him was a tricky one. Warp gates for teleportation means that he'll be able to bring in reinforcements. It was too risky to move even with just him around. As for every other villain inside that room, there was no room for guesses. What Deku didn't know, he didn't know. The possibility of escape was slim. The best course of action would be keeping himself alive long enough till he's rescued. You know, I really want to kill you. Tamura's voice felt like a knife cutting through him. Deku shivered, but kept his face hard, unwilling to cooperate. But I'm thinking that you're going to be great bait now, for All Might. He rubbed his neck, leaning over his chair with a hand reached out. Deku winced, moving his head farther back as the fingers approached him. I was thinking, right, that we use Bakugo and get him to join us. His strength, his entire character screams a villain. Tamura explained, laughing. You're wrong. Deku spat out, biting his lip right after. Kaken would never be persuaded to be a villain. He aims for the top, to be the one pro hero, just like All Might. He didn't mention the name, knowing very well from the last time he and Tamura met that the villain absolutely detested him. Bringing him up might be a bad choice of words. Well, it doesn't matter what he wanted. I would have given him the option to join, but if he still refused, we would have made him anyways. Though, I was thinking, and hear me out. He placed 2 fingers on Deku's forehead. Wouldn't it be better for the story if the person that turned villain was the hero? Deku swallowed. What is he saying? Like, how much more fun would that be? Sure, we take the kid that already seems like a villain, turn him into a villain, but you, Mr. No, one's fanboy. Imagine if you were the one to turn into a villain. Tamura explained, his teeth showing as a wide grin spread across his face, the same one that left Deku shivers down his spine back at the shopping outlet. You know how much more people would despair, how much All Might would despair. When he said his name, Tamura's voice was lowered and laced with disgust. No, I'm never going to be a villain, no matter what you do. Deku screamed out, his eyes already brimming with tears. He came so far to become a hero. There was no way they can persuade him, no matter what kind of quirk one of them had. If it was a brainwashing quirk again, he'll figure something out. There was a limit too. He just had to exploit it to the best he can. He could do this. His spirit was strong. It's always been strong. Deku just had to. Tamura. The voice came from a screen. Everyone turned to look at the source of the fuzzy voice. Shigaraki Tamura got out of his seat and headed over to the screen. Sensei, I need your help. I think it's time to get little Midoriya on our side. Tamura held his hands out, similar to a child pleading for a toy. A wise decision, Tamura. I'll prepare. In the meantime, break his spirit. The voice on the screen went dead, and Deku's eyes shot up as Tamura straightened his back. He turned and headed over to Deku, eyes widened with madness as he grabbed a hold of Deku's shoulders, one pinky up. You should be lucky, getting a private lesson from Sensei himself. At least before then, I can play around with you for a bit. The pinky went down. All fingers were on Deku's shoulder and his clothes had started tearing away. Then his skin. Stop. Deku screamed out, feeling his shoulder be torn apart slowly, crumbling away as the muscles below it blistered and screeched. He had seen Aizawa-sensei's elbow been touched and disintegrated, but the feeling was so much worse than it looked. He gritted his teeth, trying not to scream and give Tamura the satisfaction. But once he placed his other hand on the other shoulder, Deku cried out, tears rolling down his face as both of his shoulders began disintegrating slowly. It was only his shoulders, but it felt like his entire body was being pulled apart, piece by piece. It didn't feel like someone was pulling away a whole piece, but instead someone was grabbing at Deku's skin, pulling it out, and cutting small pieces at a time while keeping their grip. The pain was nearly unbearable. If Deku didn't have a high tolerance for pain, he might have passed out, even considering the wounds and bruises he sustained while fighting muscular earlier. Deku moved to bit down on his lip, to try and focus on that pain as blood seeped down both his shoulders and now his bottom lip. In his head he screamed, louder and louder. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, All Might. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everyone, please. Tears continued to roll down his cheek, his shoulders looking nothing like red, bloody splotches before Tamura let go. I can't wait to meet the changed you. Make sure you thank Sensei for his gift. Consider it the best kind of power-up. Tamura's grin appeared once more as black, gooey liquid came pouring out of Deku's mouth and enveloped him, transporting him away. Tamura looked down at the empty chair, grinning before he turned towards the door. A knock. Pizza delivery. He only grinned wider. Everything was black. The darkness was heavy and it didn't feel like the usual darkness of the night. He had ended up on the floor somewhere, hard and cold. Concrete probably. Deku's body screamed out in agony, as the waves of nerves splitting from his shoulders transported its way down to his entire nervous system. He nearly choked out a sob before hearing a cold, elderly voice. Oh dear, that Tamura did quite a job on you, didn't he? Don't mind him, he seemed to be very excited by you being here. Out of the darkness stepped an older man, with a deformed face and a dark suit dressed him well. Deku felt the air turn extremely cold, the atmosphere become dangerously ill. This man screamed of pure evil. Deku tried to move himself away, but screamed out in pain as his body twisted onto itself, both from his shoulder wounds and previous overexertion. Don't worry now, let me help you. The man leaned down and placed his hand on Deku's face. His eyes widened before he felt his entire body tense up. An almost cooling, calming wave spread across his entire body, fixing his wounds both externally and internally. It wasn't like Recovery Girl's power where it sped up a person's healing process. This quirk was a healing quirk altogether that had no repercussions. It felt too good. Almost enough for Deku to sigh and smile in relief, but considering he was being healed by the villain, the feeling was bittersweet. His body rebuilt itself, patching up every last wound that he accumulated over the course of the few days. Deku couldn't help but feel refreshed. Your face. The man spoke up, reminding Deku where he was and that the man's hand was still on his face. That's strange. Might sound odd, but your face reminds me of my younger brother. Deku's eyes widened at the implication. He slowly turned towards him, swallowing hard as his voice refused to be let out. He did his best to stutter out "Are you, all for one?" The man only grinned. Deku froze. This was the man that All Might was destined to fight and defeat. No, it was the man that Deku had to defeat. Everything One for All accumulated to was in order to stop this evil that was now standing in front of him. So you are my brother. I suppose not technically, but the man's hand left Deku's have and went down to his arm, helping him up and steadying the boy. If Deku didn't know anything was that going on, it was almost as if a kind gentleman had given him assistance off the floor. You are so much like him. Tell me, Izuku, before receiving One for All, what was your quirk? Deku refused to say anything. Whether it was from defiance or pure terror, he couldn't open his mouth. A hand went up to his forehead. A thumb onto his forehead gave All for One the answer. Quirkless. You really are my brother, aren't you? Izuku, you have no idea how happy it makes me to know that you will be alongside Tamura now. When I was younger, I longed for my brother to be by my side. Finally, I can live through Tamura and you. Before Deku could react, the man wrapped his arms around him in an embrace. Deku didn't know what was happening. He was terrified, frozen with absolute horror as this name, the one that is deemed the purest of evils, was hugging him like they were old friends. Now then, let's get to work. Two hands grabbed a hold of Deku's head as his entire mind blacked out. Izuku Midoriya sniffed. The young boy, only about the age of 5, sat on the ground with bruises and cuts from scraping the ground. Looking up, he saw Katsuki Bakugou, his hands cupped as small explosions lit up. A few other of students from their preschool had gathered around to watch him use his quirk. See Deku, my quirk is so much cooler. I can beat you now, but when you get your quirk, I'll still beat you. He laughed before walking away. Right, when Izuku gets his quirk, he'll be able to become a great hero. He'll rival Bakugou. He'll be just like All Might. Except, he never got his quirk. Time flashed forward. The constant teasing from Bakugou became more and more degrading. But Izuku had held onto his All Might action figure and shouted back once. Just you wait, Kaken. I can still be a hero, even without a quirk. The phrase was met with an explosion to the face and let Izuku on the ground. Shut up, Deku. You're useless. Quirkless piece of shit. He laughed. Izuku hated the name Deku. More time flashed. He was going to apply for UA, despite everyone's disbelief. Even if he was quirkless, they had changed the rules to state that even people without a quirk were able to apply. Even if no one had been accepted on those merits, there was still a chance. Hey, I got an idea. If you really want a quirk, why don't you swan dive off the roof and die? Then you can reborn with one. Izuku winced, staring at Kaken with tears brimming in his eyes, as usual. The fierce boy only threatened him with more explosions. It wasn't like Izuku hadn't thought about something like that before. Every night he considered ways to obtain a quirk. Maybe if he threw himself into a vast of toxic waste. No, it was okay. Because he could become a hero without one, right? Life at home was quiet. Both his parents went across borders to work, but Izuku knew it was because they wanted nothing to do with him. He never knew his father much anyways, but Izuku could tell that his mother felt guilty about not being able to pass down her quirk to him. He didn't care if he was quirkless, he just wished his mother showed him more support. He had finally met his idol. On a rare chance that Izuku was taken by a villain, and out of all of the heroes that could have rescued him, it was the one and only All Might. Izuku had to take the chance presented to him. He had to ask him, the person he looked up to the most, and the person who will tell him what he wanted to hear. Even if I don't have a quirk, can I still be a hero? The now frail-looking All Might only shook his head. Rejection, flat-out refusal, is no. One hero. All Might had told him no, he could never be a hero. Deep down, Izuku should have known this. He knew deep down that it was impossible for him, so why did he hold on to hope for so long? Why did All Might tell him no? Why? Why couldn't he be a hero? Izuku had walked straight to school after that. He climbed up onto the school roof and looked down at the city he longed to protect. Tears rolled down his eyes as he looked at the hero notebook he'd been creating for himself. When he becomes a hero, there was no use for it. He threw it off the roof, flinging it over the fence, crying out loudly as he watched his dream disappear into the ground below. Izuku took a moment to reconsider what he was doing. What was he doing? There wasn't anything left for him. He was useless, quirkless. There wasn't anything Izuku wanted to be but a hero, and he couldn't. It was reality now. He took the time to think of those around him. He didn't have any friends, and Kaken was the one that suggested the plan really, so he wouldn't care if he left the earth. His parents had left him long ago, and now his one shining hope had gave him the slap in the face reality has been trying to scream at him for the longest time. He wondered if there were heroes who specialized in suicide prevention. Izuku never recalled hearing about a hero like that, which made him laugh. He was too useless to even be saved by something like this. There was no one left in the world for him, no one to protect. He truly believed that maybe if he did jump, he could be reborn. With one hand on the fence, he began climbing up on it. No one stopped him, either because they didn't see him or no one truly cared anyways. That's what Izuku thought, sitting on top of the wired fence. He tried to think of reasons to get himself down, to stop what he was doing. I like eating katsudon. If I die, I can't eat that, he told himself, but frowned. He could eat some if he was reborn anew. Maybe he'd like something else. I really like my shoes. He could jump with his shoes on. Maybe he'd be reborn with them. Everything Izuku thought was minimal. Absolutely useless, just like him. Even he wasn't able to think of ways to prevent himself from jumping. He couldn't even save himself. With one last look to the sky, he tried to imagine All Might, in his hero form, coming towards him and stopping him, grabbing him and holding him, telling him that he's wanted and he's still someone with passion. You can still be a hero. He wished for that to happen, but once he was plummeting to the ground, he realized that no one was going to rescue him. Maybe he just wasn't worth being saved. At the last second, Izuku closed his eyes, tranquility washing over him. When he opened his eyes, he was on a bed. A man with a scarred face and a black suit sat beside him. Next to him was a young man, older than Izuku, with gray hair and chapped lips. Izuku's hand flew behind him, his instincts kicking in. He tried to find his backpack to offer the young man some Vaseline that he always kept in the front pocket. You're awake. Young man, you gave us quite a scare. The man spoke, leaning over to look at him. Where am I? That's what Izuku had wanted to say, but instead, the first thing that comes out of his mouth is, I'm sorry. The younger man raised an eyebrow. You take a jump off a roof and you're apologizing. Geez, how fucking twisted are you? The older man didn't say anything to that. He kept his face turned to Izuku. Tell me, dear boy, why did you do it? Izuku's heart ached as he spilled all of his feelings out to two strangers. Everything from his goal to be a hero, to the constant bullying for being quirkless, to how he came home to no one, to finally meeting All Might and then being told he couldn't be a hero. His life was shattered at that instant. Life was no longer meaningless. All Might, huh? What a joke. The younger man hissed out, placing his fists on the bed, keeping his fingers away. Listen, kid, just because that excuse of a hero told you that you couldn't be one, doesn't mean you listen. His voice grew with animosity, something Izuku hadn't heard before when talking about the one pro hero. Izuku Midoriya, it seems that we stopped you from death, but what will you do now? The older man asked. Izuku sat up in the bed, gripping the blanket and biting his lip. Nothing changed really. His resolve to die was still there. He was silent. Izuku. The man spoke again, using his first name fondly. It almost felt like a father who was giving his son advice. What if I told you that you can be a hero? Izuku turned to face the man. But how? He asked, tears brimming again. I don't have a quirk. What if I told you I could give you one? The room went silent. Izuku stared at him, then to the younger man to see if he was bluffing in some sort, if this was all a practical joke. So many questions ran through the young boy's mind. Too many questions. Why me? Was all Izuku managed to say, clutching at his chest. Because, from just knowing you now, I know that your passion is true. You have the heart of a hero. And I can't sit idly by and watch you destroy your life. So if you'll agree, join me. I'll make sure that you become a hero that's even better than All Might. One that will look to a child and tell them you can be a hero. A hand extended. With a sniff and a sob, Izuku accepted. Izuku, all for one, spoke up, letting go of Deku's head. The black goo wrapped itself around the young boy, leaving only his face there as a new hero suit was placed on him. It was the one that Izuku had imagined for himself, but with alterations Sensei provided. His new implanted memories will adjust soon. And for good measurement, Sensei had given him a hidden quirk that would pair nicely with his newfound, altered mind. Sensei. Deku looked up, then from left and right. Sensei, where are we? What's going on? We're at the Namu base. It appears that we have been found by the heroes. You were stunned for a while. Do you remember anything? He asked, not really interested in an actual response before turning towards the front of the building. They would come soon. I remember being with Tamu-chan. Did Kurogiri transported me here? He asked, concern growing as he clenched his fists and got ready for whoever was coming. The building had been brought down by Mount Lady. Deku had put himself in front of his sensei to block whatever debris would be flying over there. Let me handle this, Izuku. All for one spoke before walking out of the dark side of the building they were. Even with Beast Genist's intuition, Deku knew that it was no use for his sensei. The musculoskeletal coiling matched with air propulsion had sent the pro-heroes flying backwards, destroying the neighborhood they were in. Noticing that Beast Genist had taken his comrades out of the blast range, Sensei laughed and began clapping. As expected of the No. 4 hero, I was trying to blast everyone away, but in an instant you controlled everyone's clothes and pulled them out of the way. Your judgment, your technique, you've got nerve of steel. Isn't that so, Izuku? The young boy beamed, following his sensei out into the light. That's definitely Beast Genist for you. Not only does he have a versatile quirk that can affect anyone who's wearing clothes, he's also known for his swift judgment that could never be taken from his knowledge and admiration for heroes. It was one thing Sensei felt needed to stay. From then on, the battle ensured. Tamura had been brought over with the other villains, much to his relief. He was ready to leave though, reluctant knowing he had to assist Tamura in any way he could until All Might came crashing in, saying his name. It made his stomach churn. He didn't need saving, and never from him. That time had passed. Deku. Now that was a name he hadn't heard in a very long time. Everyone in the base referred to him as Izuku, sometimes Izkan, but that name laced with a specific voice, Deku couldn't help but smile. Finally, it was his time to shine. To meet his rival. He jolted towards him and punched him square in the face. Everything after that was fueled by excitement and adrenaline. Kaken was here, he had friends too. It made Deku's stomach churn with both joy and envy. He wasn't ready to confront his childhood friend, but it didn't stop from him making a monologue of his past. Deku was a chatterbox anyhow, so being able to finally give the world his backstory had excited him. It might have been the rush of excitement that stunted Deku's rational strategy. He had forgotten the friends that were with Kaken, so when an ice barricade was built he grew annoyed. Kaken and the others had made their way, and Deku had wearily announced his resentment to his previously favorite hero. He eventually left, watching as his sensei have his last fight with One for All. He landed next to Tamura in an unknown location with the rest of the villains, standing there, staring at him. Deku's first instincts were to go to Tamura. Tamu-chan, are you all right? He took a hold of his shoulder. Shigaraki Tamura would have slapped him away, but he remembered what his sensei told him. The boy would be key to their success. He had a suspicion that the boy was now brainwashed, having different memories implanted that showed Tamura as someone to be respected and cared for. Not only a few moments before was Tamura grabbing Deku's shoulder and making him cry in agony, destroying his skin. Now he was holding his shoulder, asking if he was all right. He grinned. I'm fine, Izuku. We have to support Sensei now. They all looked around, turning to see a small TV against the wall, unknown to either of them. The memories that Sensei had implanted into Izuku Midoriya had made Shigaraki Tamura seem like an older brother. It was obvious once someone thought about it. If Tamura were to be the successor of All for One and Izuku was the successor of One for All, then he wanted to parallel his own relationship with his brother. All the memories pointed towards Tamura as his friend, someone who had given him hope when no one else was there. Whether Tamura liked that or not, he would soon find out that he himself needed someone like Izuku in his life. A younger apprentice who now shared the same drive. The boy that once looked up to All Might was now their goal the same. Snuff out the flames of the previous One for All. If they had met under different circumstances, would they have gotten alone? The artificial Tamura in Deku's memories was obviously designed to keep the illusion as realistic as possible. But the villain wondered how much if it would really be his responses and actions. It dawned on him that he might have actually liked Izuku, his drive and his intelligence if it wasn't for the boy's love and admiration for All Might. Now that the drive was destroyed and recreated, however, it meant that Tamura could use the boy the way he liked. Actually get along with him and he'll still follow Tamura around like a dog. The two of them had cried when they watched their sensei be taken away. Tamura was ready to throw a fit, a tantrum and destroy everything that was in that dark space. Kurogiri was ready to transport his hands away if he were to touch one of them. But Deku had come over and placed a hand on his shoulder once more, smiling through his tears. It's your time, Tamu-chan, he told him. In that instant, Tamura almost took that smile to be a reminiscence of All Might, but came to realize that it was a smile from Izuku Midoriya's heart that made him actually calm down. He nodded. He was going to take down All Might, and his special weapon was standing willing next to him, ready to risk his life for him. Tamura was ready to destroy All Might and deny him everything. He couldn't wait to see the No. 1 hero's reaction to Deku taking all of the hits from all of the heroes to protect him. The despair that was coming was inevitable. After Kamino Ward, everyone had gone home with a piece of their hearts missing. All Might, also known as Toshinori Yagi, had stepped down as the No. One hero, the world discovering his true form. The school found it to be the best course of action to have all the students move into the dorms for better protection, and both All Might and Aizawa were making trips to the students' homes. Bakugo sat on the family's sofa next to his father as his mother went up to answer the door. He was quiet, a lot more quiet than usual, but both his parents understood why and didn't press him further. They knew their Katsuki was one to think at times like these, and the best action for them to take was to watch out for him and support him. Thank you for having us. All Might's new voice sounded so much different. There wasn't any pep in his words. He sounded tired, groggy, and old. Bakugo would have never said that out loud, but still, this man was his idol. Deku's idol as well. He looked up at him as both teachers took a seat. We've told you ahead of time, Aizawa started gently. We'd like to hear your answer and give insight on any questions you may have. We understand that these are difficult times and you'd rather prefer to be with your son. It's fine with us. Mitsuki, Bakugo's mother, grinned and slapped the backside of his son. Bakugo's face scrunched up. Don't hit me, you hag. Another hit to the back of his head. Respect your mother, you little shit. Both Toshinori and Aizawa blinked, feeling like they understood why Bakugo was the way he is. The bickering went on for a while, Masaru Bakugo trying to step in but with no results. Mitsuki turned back towards the teachers, her face softened. Considering everything that's happened, there really isn't any reason to not let our Katsuki stay with you. They told us that he was targeted by the villains and was nearly kidnapped. She left out the reason why he wasn't taken. If he's still in danger, well, what can me and my husband do? It was a truth that lingered over the two parents. We're not heroes, obviously, but our Katsuki is strong. Mr. Aizawa, I remember what you said about my son during one of his matches during the sports festival. He's not dumb, he's clever, careful, and driven. She laughed, placing a hand on her son's head. Everyone knows about what happened to Izuku in this neighborhood. She brought up the name that left everyone silent, frozen and in pain. This family still believes in you all, and we trust that you'll take care of our Katsuki and bring back Izuku. Her face was hopeful, a small smile reached them. Bakugo looked away. His mother had been school friends with Inko before she got married and kept their friendship throughout Deku and Katsuki's childhood. It was probably the reason why the two boys were always around each other when they were younger. Mitsuki had once told him that while the boys were going to UA, Inko Midoriya had voiced her concerns to her and admitted she was scared that her son would continue to be harassed by Katsuki. She had lectured him about that, and he begrudgingly had to admit that Izuku Deku Midoriya was no longer someone that could be pushed around. The Bakugas bowed their heads to the teachers, thanking them for their time and care. As All Might and Aizawa headed out, the young fiery boy ran out to stop them both. His heart felt heavy again, a hand gripping his chest as he looked All Might directly. What is Deku to you? He asked, recalling the moment he saw on the giant building's screen. All throughout school, it seemed like All Might had taken an interest to Deku. On top of that, the sudden resurgence of Deku's quirk was far too suspicious to ever leave Bakugo's mind. He then remembered that Deku had told him that his quirk was gifted to him. Toshinori had stayed quiet. Aizawa took a look at the two of them and walked back into the car to give them privacy. Bakugo, my boy, young Midoriya told you that his newfound power was passed down? Yes. The man who was once the No.1 pro hero turned towards Bakugo. He could only nod, not sure what to say about it. He could definitely infer some things. I'm planning to tell everything to Midoriya's mother. If you'd like to come along, you're welcome to hear. Bakugo's eyes widened. The last time Katsuki Bakugou was inside the Midoriya's household was probably before middle school. He used to come inside often, but mostly accompanied by his own mother. He remembered Inko Midoriya bringing out a specific brand of cookies that she knew Bakugo loved. He recalled never saying thank you and being hit by his mother after woofing down 2 at a time. On the coffee table was a plate of those cookies and some tea, but the woman who was once known as Auntie to him wasn't smiling. Her face was red, blotted with tear stains. Inko's hair was a mess. Her eyes sunken, swollen, and tired. She probably hadn't eaten at all since the police told her what had happened to her son. Probably even before that. Mrs. Midoriya, we understand the amount of worry, sadness, and pain you are in. All Might's voice treaded lightly. The woman had begun pulling at the fabric of her skirt. They told me to tell you that we are doing everything in our power to rescue your son. But as the previous No.1 hero and Izuku's mentor, I promise you I will rescue him. Bakugo heard the essence of All Might's strength in his tone. Inko's face begun to scrunch up, tears streaming down the already beaten-out path. It's your fault. Her voice was soft, but they both heard her clearly. Her eyes, though red and wet with tears, looked malicious. I'm sorry, it's your fault. Inko screamed out, standing up abruptly. Both All Might and Bakugo were caught off guard, staying in their seats. Izuku's always looked up to you. He's wanted to be you. To be a hero. When I found out he was quirkless, I was relieved. But then he gets a quirk and all of a sudden he's coming home nearly broken. His hands smashed and bruised and bloody, and it's all because of you. She spat harshly at All Might. Bakugo's eyes widened, feeling a hint of fear, guilt. All Might only watched, face saddened, while Bakugo felt the verbal lashings to be out of hand. Tashinori Yagi understood that Inko was only attacking him because she was a mother. She needed something to blame. He knew this would happen and readied himself for every single punch to the gut. If only he didn't get his quirk. But I know even then he would have still tried to become a hero no matter what. But with the quirk he has now, he became so destructive, and now he sees Tashinori got up and bowed his head. I'm the one that gave him his quirk. Inko and Bakugo's eyes widened, staring at him. The room had gone silent once again. Inko's sobbing had subsided. Her full attention was on the man. What? Bakugo didn't know how much time had passed. He didn't really understand what One for All, but what really probed him in the back of his mind was the question, why Deku? His turmoil had to be set aside. If he were to get angry about Deku being the chosen one, then it was possible he would say more things he would regret. He might have said that Deku wasn't deserving. Also something along the lines of how he should die. Not something he'd want to say in front of his worrying mother. He didn't know who would slap him first, All Might or Inko. Once everything was explained, another air of quietness had plagued the room. The amount of tension that built up during the last hour or so had thickened further. The silence broke with more sobbing. My son, Izuku, he's my world, he's my hero. I know that he's got the heart of a hero, but if he just didn't have a quirk, he would have never been in this situation. Her voice rose again, tears and snot falling from her face. I know he wants to be a hero. I know that he wanted your gift, but as his mother, I just can't stand this anymore. My heart can't take this, and now my boy is gone. Her wails struck chords into the two of them. Bakugo finally decided to speak up. Mrs. Midoriya. Bakugo was ready to reassure her, ready to convince her that Deku would be brought back to her safely. She cut him off, slicing his words with her own sharp retort. And you've always bullied him. You made him life a hell as a kid. Don't think I didn't know. Every day he came back with bruises and burn marks. You didn't think I knew. You were awful to him, and yet he saved you. Her voice wavered, the anger building. The frustration and utter hatred shone through the tears in her eyes, and Bakugo's chest ached. I'm not my son, so I can't understand why he would risk his entire life for someone like you. He truly is a hero, but I can't help think that it should have been you taken. Inko's words were bitter, malicious, and unapologetic. A mother's love treaded across any danger. Her love for her son shone the brightest in that moment. Tashinori opened his mouth to say something. Anything to buffer the poison spewing from the mother's mouth, but Bakugo had stood up from his seat, storming over to Inko's side. The older man's heart jumped. His mind immediately went to the worse. If Aizawa hadn't chosen to stay in the car for this meeting, then he was sure the young boy would be wrapped in bandages and pulled back. Bakugo, don't. The boy fell to his knees, placed his hands in front of him, and bowed his head to the ground in front of her. I quote, I'm sorry. Silence again. I know I'm a fucking asshole, and I know what I did to Deku was wrong. But I swear to you I'm going to save him, and it's not because I'm aiming to be a hero, but it's because I owe it to your goddamn son. He couldn't stop himself from cursing in front of the mother. His nose was to the floor. No one could see the tears rolling down his nose alongside the clenched teeth holding back his cries. I swear I'll get him back for you. He screamed into the carpet. Tashinori stood there for a moment, dumbstruck by the usually prideful boy's actions. He got to his knees, bowing in front of the woman himself. We will rescue Izuku Midoriya with any means necessary, even if I have to give up my life. The once hero poured from his heart. Inko could only stagger, falling to her own knees in front of them. She wrapped her arms around them and continued crying, wailing loudly. Bakugo heard her muttered apologizes, begging them both for forgiveness and to bring her son home to her. He also heard her whisper, please, all of you come back alive. They both nodded their heads. The move to the dorms was difficult for everyone. Many of them would have been excited if it wasn't for the fact there was someone missing. What was worse, that this so-called missing student was not actually missing. He was with the villains now. The very idea of Izuku Midoriya as a villain upset his classmates, and the terror and hurt they felt rivaled the outcome of him being dead instead. If Deku knew what was happening to him right now, how would he take to that? Once they got him back, they would ask him that. They all waited for the day they could laugh about this, but a few of them refused to just wait. The class had organized a room judging competition that a few of them didn't participate in. Bakugo wasn't going to give them the pleasure of breaking into his room, tearing through his armor and finding his inner feelings. It was just a room, but it was his room that was his haven. He avoided participating in the competition by feigning fatigue, pretending to be asleep in his room. The competition was something to distract everyone from the worry and gloomy atmosphere. It was too obvious. Everyone's laughter and smiles were bittersweet, but it was the best they can do during these hard times. Once night fell and everyone went to their rooms, Bakugo went out of his room and began exploring his new living quarters. He needed to know how the kitchen worked so he could make his goddamn food, as well as where the different exits so he could walk out to train. Before he walked into the common place, He stopped hearing voices. He stood in the hallway, listening to see who they were. Probably that Kirishima and Kaminari idiot eating late at night. They seemed like those kind of people. He didn't recognize us. Do you think they erased those memories permanently? Shit, that was Ida. If it's a quirk, I doubt that it is permanent. We just need to learn what kind of memory-altering quirk it is and what possible ways that can stop its effect. The calm voice was Todoroki's. Right as always, Todoroki. The optimism in his voice wasn't as it used to be. I just can't believe this. Our Midoriya, a villain. I know. It goes against everything he is. A sigh followed. Todoroki, did you know about his past? When he was shouting at Bakugo, he never told me anything about his relationship with him. I always assumed they were strained friends thrown into competitive rivalry. Bakugo winced at his name being mentioned. No, considering everything I told him about my life, I didn't know anything about him other than what he made public to the whole class. Bakugo couldn't see, but he felt Ida nodding his head. The silence in the air was calm. There was a cricket chirping outside the kitchen's window. Ida spoke up again, gently with caution. I knew Bakugo was vicious, but I never thought he'd tell someone to. You know. A nod from Todoroki was a reply, but nothing more. Ida continued. Midoriya is truly a hero. He said he was alone before, with no friends and only Bakugo telling him to kill himself. But even so he saved him. Bakugo listened, his knuckles growing white from being clenched so tightly. He heard Ida's voice shake. A sob escaped Ida's mouth, causing Todoroki to turn to him in surprise. Ida's head was low, leaning forward on the sofa. Tears fell onto the floor. We couldn't save him. He was right in front of us and we left him. His voice quivered as Todoroki shifted closer, placing a hand onto his back. We couldn't get him that time, but we will. He's still alive, Ida. If it was any of us, we both know Midoriya would try again and again for us. Ida leaned back on the sofa, rubbing Ida's back. You're right. We'll save him, even if it takes the rest of my life. Ida's hand went up, wiping away his tears. Bakugo turned away from the hallway, heading back up to his room. That stupid brat. If he didn't have one for all, Bakugo would assume Deku's quirk was something like friendship building. It almost seemed like every person he comes into contact with becomes friends with him. Not just friends, but he's built all these strong, mutual relationships. From round face to four eyes to half-half. Not just them but everyone else in class seemed to revolve around Deku's enigma. His personality was bright, something that drew everyone to him. When he got into his room, Bakugo was ready to smash his fist into the wall. He stopped himself, knowing that Kirishima next door would wake up and run over to his dorm to check on him. Bakugo didn't want any of that. He just wanted to be left alone and wallow in his suffering. The pain and suffering that he deserved. Having the green-haired boy around felt awkward. In a span of an hour or so, the boy he deemed to be a nuisance just itching to die was now his right-hand man. Tamura Shigaraki wasn't sure how the manipulation and mind-bend work. He assumed that new memories were placed into Izuku's head. But from how far back and what were the memories even? On top of that, how long of an effect would this be? Tamura had no one to ask as the one man that knew the answers to everything had been locked away. Honestly, he was really interested to know the extents of the altered memories. He understood that the boy had been taken in by Sensei alongside Tamura. Okay, that was all he knew. Tamura didn't own any memories of the younger boy and what kind of relationship they have. While he should have been treading carefully, making sure nothing sounded too odd that might have broken the quirk's effects, the tired man wanted to know just how brainwashed Izuku Midoriya really is. The boy was sitting on a stool, talking with Kurogiri. He seemed to trust him enough to talk as much as he was now, explaining to the bartender about what had happened and how Sensei's plan for the league was to wait and regroup. Kurogiri, despite not having a face, seemed to be enjoying his talk with the young man. It was a break from the man-child he had to babysit, that's for sure. Tamura stumbled over to the two, swiftly reaching out his hand to grab at Izuku's throat. While talking, the younger boy threw his own arm up to block Tamura's reach. He then grabbed his wrist and pulled it back. Sorry, Kurogiri. Tamu-chan, what's up? Izuku turned to look at him. His eyes weren't laced with fear, just puzzlement. Tamura had decided to attack the boy out of nowhere, but Izuku treated it like nothing at all. Was this something that occurred before in Izuku's implanted memories? Despite the action being extremely unpredictable, he frowned, pulling his hand back. Stop talking to Kurogiri. Actually, the villain didn't care about whether or not someone talked to the bartender. He needed an excuse for his outburst. Izuku only smiled at him, warmly, kindly. Hey, I know you're frustrated right now. Tamura raised an eyebrow. But let's not get so feisty, okay? We're discussing what to do from here on out, Izuku explained, turning back to Kurogiri. The bartender chuckled, causing Tamura to huff in annoyance and send the man a glare. So like I was saying, the best course of action is to rally up more villains into the league. Doesn't matter if they're small or large. We need numbers right now. All Might has retired, right? But he's still a beacon of hope to everyone. People are going to think that we're going to lay low now that our leader is gone, but that won't be the case. Izuku turned towards Tamura. You're going to be leading us now, so what do you think? It caught Tamura off guard. His hands began moving towards his neck to scratch in annoyance but was stopped by Izuku. He took a hold of his hands before he began tearing at his neck. He looked at him, concerned. You gotta stop doing that. We don't have Sensei around to heal you if it gets really bad. He explained. Shit, Izuku was right about that. Sometimes when it got too bad, the wound stung and irritated Tamura even more. They'd have to get Sensei's help. Already, Izuku was acting like a picture-perfect advisor. He knew Tamura enough to stop him from self-destructing, but still respected him enough as his leader to ask his opinion. How the fuck was this the same hero brat from before? Listen, mophead. The best insult he could think of at the moment. I don't want to bring in some stupid criminals who don't know our greater goal. Plus, they'll think that they're better than us and it'll piss me off. His fingers twitched, wanting to really touch something now. Izuku only nodded. You're right about that. Low criminals will be a hassle to control, but at the moment we only have a few members. He nudged his head at the door that led to the common room. Izuku didn't know any of their names and referred to them as the others. Tamura assumed that the only people he actually knew was him and Kurogiri. But don't think of them as actual members. Think of them as stepping stones. Disposable. Izuku grinned. His face was twisted, something that even Tamura felt weird to see on the boy. We'll just gather a bunch for an assault and let them die. I think we should target UA. Tamura raised an eyebrow, looking from him to Kurogiri. Izuku, why UA? We know it'll be heavily guarded now. Kurogiri spoke up, placing some of the cups he was polishing down. Well, if you think of it, it might be the easiest way to go to destroy the hope for the future. Those students are still kids. They're not pros yet even if they have some experience under their belts. If we get rid of them, there won't be any future heroes raised in time to worry about. Then we get rid of the actual pro heroes. I'm sure they'd feel an amount of despair not being able to protect some kids, don't you think? The logic was there. The plan was, of course, risky and had to be thought out better, but the outline Izuku had sketched out began sinking in both Tamura's and Kurogiri's mind. Listen, Tamu-chan, it's your decision, but when you're fighting a stage in the video game, do you go right to the boss, or get rid of all the underlings first? Shit. He even knew to make game references. It became clear that whatever Sensei did to the boy's mind, it was phenomenal. We'll think about it, Tamura replied, frowning still. Kurogiri looked to Izuku. I believe it's an excellent strategy. Before then, I'd advise you to go meet the newest members of the league and familiarize yourself with their quirks and personality. We'll make a strategy. This made the boy beam brightly. Izuku hopped off the stool he was sitting on and headed towards the door. Thanks, Kurogiri. And while we're on the subject, I think it's fair to say I'm suggesting this plan on UA because, well, Izuku's face began to flush with embarrassment as he rubbed the back of his head. There's someone I really want to kill there. He almost laughed it out before heading through the door to meet the other villains. Kurogiri turned to Tamura, placing his hands down on the table. He makes a good point, though he doesn't understand the predicament he's in. It's more than likely that the hero's course of action is going to be rescuing Izuku. Tamura began scratching his neck again. The boy is bloodthirsty now, so he'd want to fight them. However, I find this risky as we still don't know how the Quirk's ability can be dispelled. If he were to face his former friends, they might be able to find a way to break through to him. Tamura scratched harder. Shigaraki, what do you want to do? Tamura began to scratch harder and stopped. Remember Izuku's touch. He would probably get mad if he started bleeding. He placed his hand down. We don't know shit about what Sensei did to him, but I don't think it's something that can be easily fixed. Sensei's smarter than that. If he wants to fight, we should let him. Tamura huffed angrily, his fingers itching to scratch his own skin. As you wish. Kurogiri turned towards the door. Tamura turned too, walking towards it. He's ours now. There's no way that any of those brats can bring him back with their dumb power of friendship or whatever. I'm actually getting excited imagining the horrors on their face when Izuku kills one of them. Tamura smirked. If they were to get Izuku to UA and slaughter one of those twerps, it would land a heavy toll on all of them. Even if Izuku were to snap out of his hold and be returned, their lives would never be the same. The idea was picture perfect, except for the fact Tamura didn't want Izuku to leave the league. It was the missing piece that they needed for success. The heroes can't have him back. Izuku Midoriya did not have a villain name. At first, when he considered using the name Deku, it only made him angry enough to demolish an interior wall. The implications of the name would never change. It was always an insult to him that meant the one who can't do anything. He always wondered if his parents were aware when they chose the name for him. He was better off going by his last name, which was basic enough. But even that name left a bitterness in his mouth. It was a family name, and he didn't know if it was because he resented his parents for abandoning him or wanted to spare their feelings. After all, his parents weren't awful, they just weren't there for him. He wondered what might have happened if his mother stayed at home with him. Maybe he wouldn't have felt the need to disappear that day. He had met all of the villains in the common area and wrote down their quirks and personalities in his notebook when they weren't looking. That was something Izuku never stopped doing throughout his life. When Sensei had found him and nurtured Izuku back to health, his notebook was presented to him with compliments and praises. Sensei found it on the ground close to where Izuku had fallen and went through every single page. How did he even read it? Maybe Tamura told him. Izuku was encouraged to keep writing, causing the boy to cry at the time. All of the quirks he learned just now had given him an idea for a strategy, but he would need to write them down in a separate notebook and run some simulations. There was data missing, the hero course's quirks. For some reason, Izuku felt like he had written every student's quirks and abilities down beforehand. It was confusing since he didn't know anything about the class except that Kaken had been enrolled and placed in that specific class. Maybe it was because he saw the sports festival? That should be it. He needed to see some reruns of the UA Sport Festival to compile a new notebook for a new strategy against the UA kids. Izuku. Himiko Toga began pulling at his sleeve, a hand to her face. She was blushing madly. Her wild smile was a comfort to Izuku actually. The other villains looked at her, ready to stop her from saying anything that could give away some important information. Yes, Toga-chan. Izuku flashed a small smile to her. She nearly squealed. I think you're so cool. You seem to be thinking really hard. What are you thinking of? A strategy. She started rambling as Dabai walked over, frowning. Leave him alone. We need to get ready for what he's planning. He interrupted, making Toga pout in response. Dabai turned to stare at the boy, his face full of admiration and respect. Both Toga and him were taken by the boy. Thought the latter wouldn't admit it as openly as the girl. Izuku laughed as the door opened. Both Tamura and Kirigiri walked into the room as the villains watched. Tomu-chan, what did you decide? Izuku asked, pulling out his notebook and a ballpoint pen. Tamura licked his chapped lips, moving a hand into his pocket to retrieve his father, placing it onto his face. We're going with your plan, Izuku. Congrats. The last part felt like friendly sarcasm, at least to Izuku. Great. If I can, I want to get more information on the hero course students at UA. They may still be children, but they know their strengths and are still heroes in training regardless. I was thinking I could watch some reruns of the school sports festival. A few fingers twitched from Tamura before Kirigiri walked over. Izuku, I don't believe that's wise. A hand was placed on the boy's shoulder. Why's that? I know some of the students' quirks, especially the ones that are from well-renowned families. But if I check the footage from the sports festival, I can write up an entire spreadsheet, Izuku explained, opening up his notebook. That's not what I meant. The footage from the sports festival is limited and unreliable. The students have grown tremendously since then, and I would advise you do current research on these students and their quirks. Kirigiri took into account that if Izuku were to check the sports festival footage, he would definitely see himself. Whether that would confuse him or break the manipulation altogether, it was something to avoid. Kirigiri, you're so right. Ugh. Izuku's hands went to his face. How could I be so dumb? Does that mean I get permission to do some spying? His heart leaped. His dream of going to UA was going to be realized, though in a different way. The bartender looked to Tamura to see his opinion on it. Tamura only grumbled and reached to Izuku, wrapping 4 fingers around his throat. Izuku didn't flinch or even seem to mind. His smile stayed. Fine, but don't get yourself caught. If someone sees you, kill them. The orders were out. Izuku's face shone, a grin spreading from ear to ear. Both Toga and Dabai were assigned to go with Izuku as he surveyed the dorm buildings. They weren't ready for actual spying and researching on quirks just yet. It was a precursor before the actual investigation. They needed to know the layout of the dormitory, every single nook and cranny, as well as where all the security surveillances were. Izuku wouldn't know, but the 2 other villains were there to keep Izuku in check. If something were to happen that jeopardized his brainwash, they would take him back immediately. Izuku, on the other hand, felt that Toga was there as a precaution. If they were to be caught, Toga would use the blood she had gotten from Izuku to transform into him. It would throw the heroes off and the real Izuku would make his escape. Dabai was insurance. His quirk could destroy the entire building really, as well as the forest surrounding them. While Izuku wasn't too happy to be playing babysitter at the moment, it was still true that 3 heads were better than 1. We're only on a survey mission, so really study this layout, okay? Find as many cameras as you can. Mark and note them. We'll split up and meet back here in 10, got it? He gave the orders out to the 2 of them before they dispersed. Toga had used her quirk to transform into a civilian whose blood she took earlier in the day. She would circle the perimeter on foot to see how close they could be without hitting any red zones. Dabai would stay close to the meetup point, watching the dorms from the front. If Izuku gave him the signal, he would spread his dark fire at the opening of the dorms to prevent anyone from leaving as they made their escape. That was only if they needed to get away if the mission had gone haywire. Izuku himself was too happy about the mission. Even though it was just the dormitories and not the actual school, Izuku felt like he could cry in happiness to be on campus one way or another. This could have been his at one point. What caught Izuku's eyes was the track field and battleground they had added close to the dorms. Of course, there was the actual field near the classrooms, but they must have thought it would be rewarding to have some of the outdoor training facilities near the dormitories. This school could really spend some money. He took note of the size and how far away it was from the dorms versus the entrance. He watched on top of a tree branch, using his fingers to mark distances between buildings. He made notes, both mentally and physically, about the area. It seemed like it would be a good place to lure the students, as the outdoor field was on the side of the dormitories. They could block the way to the front and back entrances, leaving them on the field facing a forest. Out of the corner of Izuku's eye, he watched as a student walked across the field and sat down in the middle, legs crossed. Squinting, Izuku couldn't help but wonder what idiot kid would want to wander into the cold night when there was danger amiss. The whole point of the dorms was so that the kids could be rounded up and watched over. Here was someone willingly leaving that protection. It almost made Izuku want to kill whoever it was. A flash of white and red finally settled in Izuku's vision. He grinned. Shouto Todoroki was out by himself, middle of the night doing what? Meditating. What a loser. He only knew about the boy through his father. Endeavor, now the no. One pro hero. Shouto himself had acquired part of his father's quirk as well as an ice quirk. He remembered that much when Izuku saw him for the first time at Kamino Ward. With a dual quirk like that, it seemed that he would be the biggest threat to the league. Izuku's hand twitched, moving towards his belt to grab a knife. He wanted to know more about the boy, his quirk, and his background. There was something intriguing about the boy. Maybe it was the scar that blotted itself onto his face. Maybe it was the fact that both his eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling as he breathed in the air. He could have taken him by surprise easily. Throw a few knives, pin him down, steal him, torture him for information. The usual things. Izuku had to stop those thoughts, knowing he had to stick to the plan he himself had created. But when would something like this be placed in front of him again? Something so nicely wrapped up and presented to him. A hand was raised. The knife was positioned. He aimed for the boy's palms. As Izuku's arm fell to throw, he stopped suddenly. His arm quivered, refusing to let go of the knife he had in his hands. Something was compelling him to stop, something that didn't feel like him. Fuck. Was it a quirk? Who was there? Izuku quickly moved his other arm and then placed his armed hand down to his side. Izuku quickly looked everywhere, scanning for any heroes ready to fight him. No one was around. Maybe it was intuition that stopped Izuku from throwing the knife. It might be the logical, rational side to Izuku's brain that told him stop. Don't do it. You're only here to survey the area, dummy. He sighed. Izuku was letting his bloodlust get the better of him. He sat on the branch and watched the boy for a while longer before heading to the other side to scan the other side of the dormitory. Everything was easy to draw out. It was exactly what a dormitory should look like, so whatever interior rooms Izuku couldn't see, he could at least map out and infer the inside. He was also able to match some of the dorm rooms to a student based on balcony alone. Izuku had a list compiled of every class 1 a student's name and picture. Some of the balconies screamed out who their owner was. Honestly, pathetic, ignorant. There wasn't any time to dress up a room when you know that there are still villains out there after you. You don't want to announce to the world that you were living there. He'd have to frown at the leopard throw blanket hanging on the balcony of a dorm. As Izuku headed back to the rendezvous point, he took a quick glance over to the field again, seeing if Todoroki was still there. He was, sitting in the same position he was in the first time Izuku saw him. The difference was that he was muttering something. Izuku might have seen the glimmer of a tear in his eye before leaving with Togo and Dabai back to the villain's base. For some unknown reason, it made Izuku want to cry as well. It was a huge surprise to find that the UA security system was not as brilliant as it was made to be. Izuku was easily able to keep his distance from the school as well as the dormitory without ever being detected. There were no close calls or instances of getting caught. Either the school was completely shit at protecting its youth or Izuku was just too good. He assumed it was the former, feeling that his stealth could have been replicated by any villain. Maybe it was because he was modest that he thought that, but nevertheless, he had collected a good amount of data. Kurogiri had given him some prior knowledge about the students of UA in the form of a piece of printed paper. It was a well-organized spreadsheet of the student roster, their quirks and weaknesses. It was a quick reference for Izuku to check when writing up his hero analysis sheets. Not only did he get the data of Class 1A, but he also achieved to find out the roster for other classes, from the hero department all the way to support, then even to general studies. He noticed everyone's routine, or so he thought. Sometimes kids would be in his blind spot as he wasn't likely to be in front of the dormitory's entrance when spying. On top of that, he was never able to look into the building no matter what angle he pushed himself in. His binoculars never cut it either, so it gave Izuku a feeling of unrest and anger. Izuku Midoriya was a perfectionist. When it came to his hero analysis, no lines were left blank. He needed to make sure that every single basis was touched to find strengths, weaknesses, and possibilities. Tamura and Kurogiri let Izuku take his time, knowing that the boy would only get antsy if he didn't receive all the data he wanted. Even in just a few days, the villains had felt like they knew the boy for longer, maybe even years. Despite only Izuku's mind being warped, it almost felt like reality was changing all on its own as a result. After taking more notes on the students, Izuku was free to do as he pleased. Tamura had given him permission to go about wherever he liked, as long as he was not seen by any suspecting heroes. In all of his memories, Izuku had only been inside of the headquarters unless on a mission with the other members. Now that Sensei had been captured and their base relocated, Izuku felt like it was time to see the things he's missed. He went to the arcade sometimes, finally taking Tamura's suggestion to try playing games. In his words, they were good for strategy making, which left Izuku laughing to his face. The idea of Tamura coming up with a clever strategy was hilarious, which left the older villain angry, nearly disintegrating Izuku's face off. Nonetheless, the games were fun and could be applicable in certain situations. If anything, Izuku played them for pure fun. To any other passerby, he looked like just another high schooler having a good time inside of an arcade. No one knew who he was and where he came from. The disguise he wore was basic, something he borrowed from Tamura: a black hoodie, jeans, and his red shoes. For whatever reason, those red shoes were a comfort to him and he rarely took them off. On other occasions, Izuku led himself to the apartment building where he once lived. He felt his heart pulling him to the structure he once called home, despite no one ever really being there. Izuku imagined where his parents were, and if they still lived there. It was a sad thought and he let it be. On this day while walking, Izuku stopped near the Dagaba Municipal Beach Park. Maybe he stopped because the sun was starting to set, and the light glistening on the water had given him some sort of beacon of hope. No, it wasn't hope, maybe it was a sense of longing. He remembered the time when he was younger and the beach had been covered in garbage and debris. Izuku couldn't help but wonder who had cleaned up the mess and their reasoning to why someone would go to such an extent for a mere beach park. Izuku couldn't help but shed a tear and he didn't know why. Bakugo was known to sneak out of the dormitory at odd times. His reasoning: to find Deku. Everyone in the class knew that was the reason despite his protests and vicious declarations of insults. His classmates would wonder who was taking Deku's disappearance and villainy the hardest. But the consensus was always Katsuki Bakugou. Even as he roared in disagreement and denial, everyone just knew. Half of the class understood that Bakugou wasn't ready to reveal his deepest regrets and pain, so they let him be. No one stopped him from trying to look for Deku. Kirishima had offered to go along but was given an explosion to the face as he attempted to follow the hot-headed boy. The pride swelling inside of Bakugou was still too great to accept help from his classmate. On top of that, he didn't want Kirishima to follow him when he went to the Midoriya household. Ever since he declared to Inko Midoriya that he will rescue her son, Bakugou had isolated himself from his classmate. Even if they all were friends with the green-haired brat, it was his burden alone to take on. His responsibility, his debt. Only a few choice classmates had tried to offer their help, those being people he were acquaintances with, such as Ijiru Kirishima and Denki Kaminari. Other offered, like Shouto Todoroki, Tenya Ida, and Ochako Uraraka. However, those were all close to Deku and felt like pebbles to him. None of them could help him. It was something Bakugou had to face by himself. He didn't need any of them. He could save Deku by himself. Bakugou had left the Midoriya residence once the sun started to set. He had continued to visit her knowing that she would be lonely and refused to leave her in a pit of despair. Despite his own mother going to her place every day or so, Bakugou still felt the need to be there for her. Every time he came over, she would bring out the cookies he liked as a young child. Even while in pain, she was still thinking of others. It was no argument where Deku had gotten his kindness. The way back to the station would have been easier if he had chosen not to take the scenic walk. Truth be told, he just didn't want to go back to the dorms. Going back meant being defeated. It meant that he didn't find Deku. There was something about looking out at the beach park as the sun descended that gave Bakugou a sense of uneasiness. To him it meant the day was ending. Another day of failure. He wondered who had cleaned up the beach a while back, thinking that they must have been paid a good lot of money to even attempt something like that. What was strong was that the park had been cleaned all in a night's work. That was the true mystery. With his hands in his pocket, he stopped to look out towards the ocean. The sea breeze had blown his hair back gently. Bakugou couldn't help but frown. He turned to continue walking until he saw someone else in the distance, on the beach, staring out into the ocean. As the wind blew, the hood that rested on the person's head had fallen down, revealing a mass of green hair. His eyes widened. He continued to stare. Bakugou's body froze as the wind continued to blow. Could it really be him? Or was this some sort of illusion? Maybe something of his own creation where he desperately wanted to see Deku. When the boy turned his head, Bakugou saw a tear roll down his cheek. He knew. Deku. The name channeled itself down the beach, the waves following in its path as Bakugou used his explosions behind him to propel himself forward. The amount of adrenaline that burst through him was unimaginable, the most he's ever had. One of his hands stopped, throwing itself up as he readied himself to land a punch on the boy. Izuku, on the other hand, recovered from his shock and reacted. A fist slammed into the sand below. Izuku used the force of the punch to throw the sand up in a smoke screen-like manner. Bakugo fell into a wall of sand and rolled onto his back, standing up quickly and gained his footing. In front of him stood Izuku Midoriya, readying his fists with a small smile on his face. "Wow, Kaken, I really didn't expect to see you." The boy's eyes darkened. He would have went on to say something about not seeing Kaken leave the building, but he refrained from doing so. He couldn't give away the fact he was spying on the campus. "Deku, you piece of shit, where have you been? Do you know how much trouble you've caused me?" Bakugo's hands twitched, explosions readying as he panted heavily. Izuku could only ready himself. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that I was your problem." A coy smirk set Bakugo off. He threw himself at the other boy, using his right hand to land a blow. Izuku blocked it with a kick upwards, Bakugo's momentum being thrown off. "It's been years, but I remember that you always start with a right hook. I think you're underestimating me, Kaken." Deku leaned in to deliver his own right hook punch, smashing his fist into Bakugo's face as he flew feet across the sand. He turned his body around to land on his feet on the sand, using his fingers to hook into the sand to stop him from moving. Shit, Bakugo's rage was getting the better of him. He should have known that even brainwashed Deku would remember about his goddamn right hook. Habits don't die without leaving a fight. "Deku," he screamed out, charging right back at him. "Snap the fuck out of it, you stupid brat." Bakugo used his explosions to propel himself over Deku. Then using his left hand he changed the moment of the fall to land a kick on the boy's back. Izuku fell forward and quickly regained his balance, a smile still plastered on his face. Bakugo himself could not smile throughout the entirety so far. His focus was on the boy in front of him. Knock him out. Take him back. That was the plan, but easier said than done. "You have been brainwashed." Bakugo screamed out. The anger and disgust in his voice was evident. If he could get Deku to realize his situation, he might be able to pull himself out of it. He remembered the sport festival and the match he had with Shinsu. No one was able to break out of his hold by themselves, but fucking Deku did it, so he should fucking do it now. "You're not a dirty-ass villain, so stop acting like one, you fuckface." Izuku could only stare at Bakugo, a face that screamed disappointment. "Honestly, what the hell are you even talking about? If you're trying to get me off guard, it's not going to work." Izuku charged back at Bakugo, his fists surging with power as he threw a punch in the air, sending waves of wind and sand hurling towards Bakugo. The other quickly used his quirk to create an explosion to counter it. But once the sand and smoke subsided, Izuku was there in front of him, a first thrown up to catch Bakugo right under the chin. "That fucker." Bakugo winced in pain as he fell backwards. Before he could get up, two knives plunged themselves into both of his palms. A scream was released as he tried to use his explosions, the sweat slipping into the wound the knives had made and began tearing apart the skin. His explosions were failing him. His explosions were hurting him. The knives bore into his now charged palms, deep enough to exit out of his hand and into the sand below him. Izuku walked over to him, a frown appearing on his face. "Kaken, why do I feel like you were holding back? Or maybe it's the fact that I might be." Izuku's eyes lit up as he leaned down. "Stronger than you." His lips moved to turn into a twisted smile, the same one that Bakugo and the others had seen during Kamino War. The look of a villain ready to kill. "Honestly, I really wanted a match with you that wasn't this disappointing, but I was told that if I were to get caught I should kill whoever catches me. You're not really an exception, Kaken." The boy sighed, standing up as he pulled out another knife from his belt. The blade shone against the sunset. The sun seemed to be falling faster as Bakugo felt his life's clock ticking. Bakugo gritted his teeth, his eyes filled with hatred and terror and remorse and guilt. Everything swirled into his vision as he felt his eyes sting. It wasn't supposed to be like this. His voice was barely audible. What?" Izuku frowned again. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was supposed to be kidnapped. Not you. You fucking saved me when I didn't fucking ask you to, and now you're like this and it's my fault." His breath hitched, his lungs continued to pump out verbal spews. "This isn't the fucking loser who never quits. This isn't you, and for once in your life let me save you." In that moment, Bakugo thought he saw a flicker of Izuku's old self in his eyes. It quickly diminished as it was replaced with a seething smile barred behind gritted teeth. His eyes went back to craving death. "What the hell are you saying, Kaken? You trying to save me? All you've done was destroy me. So now I'm going to destroy you." Bakugo's face fell flat. His view wasn't the knife that was being thrusted down, nor was it the sun in the background finally fading away. It was the fact that Izuku had started crying, his tears falling onto his face as it mixed with his own tears that had fallen. In that moment, it looked like Izuku's face was asking for help. FWOOSH. A stream of fire had been blasted from the side, causing Izuku to jump back from his spot to dodge the attack. He turned to see two boys charging towards him. Both of them were the boys Izuku had saw at Kamino Ward. Now he knew their names, Ijiru Kirishima and Shouto Todoroki. Izuku scowled, switching his knife's hold from bottom to top as he charged towards the two of them. Todoroki had sent another flame blast towards the boy, which Izuku dodged by jumping in the air. A wall of ice had created itself from the floor up to make a ceiling. Using his legs, Izuku quickly kicked down the ice barrier and landed onto the sand, his knife aiming to the nearest student. His blade clanked onto Kirishima's hardened arm, Izuku gritting his teeth as he tried another strike to the boy's head. Another arm was raised to block the attack, but Izuku was ready with his other hand himself, throwing a punch towards the boy's middle. Again, more hardening, but he felt the blow of his powered-up punch get through to the boy. Shit, Midoriya, you can really throw a punch. Kirishima smiled, wincing as he grabbed a hold of Izuku's wrist. Izuku quickly whipped back his blade to stab at the hand that was holding him. The boy let go and they both furthered distance from each other. Todoroki had made his way over to Bakugo's side, helping him pull the blades out of his palms. What the fuck are you two doing here? He spat, holding onto his hands as he felt the blood bubbling down his palms. Todoroki pulled first aid out of his pouch and handed it to him. Saving you, obviously. It was too direct and Bakugo was about to yell something before Todoroki pressed the gauze onto his palms. Don't think we were just going to ignore every time you leave the dorms. You're not the only one who's driven to save him. Before Bakugo could say anything else, he heard quick footsteps race towards the location. Whipping his head up, he saw every single one of his classmates racing down the pathway to the beach. No one was missing from Class 1A. Even Aizawa was accompanying them. Bakugo, are you all right? The voice belonged to Uraraka. She had ran to his side as the rest of the class caught up with Kirishima to surround Izuku. The villain boy gritted his teeth. He was outnumbered. He didn't have all of assessments ready or a well-thought-out strategy. He could learn as he fought, but when it was 20 versus 1, well, there was going to be a disadvantage. He tried to recall every single one of their faces and names but became frustrated as his mind began fogging up. Instead, he turned his attention to Bakugo, his face twisted with malice and envy. Kaken, look at everyone who came to help you out. Must be great to have so many friends, huh? Hukachan. His voice was laced with venom, but at the same time sounded like a wounded puppy. Bakugo had gotten himself up, standing as he held onto his hands. You idiot. They're all your friends, he screamed out, matching the other boy's anger. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Izuku's head began to spin. The memories in his head began to fizzle in and out of existence before he sees Sensei in front of him. Everything stopped moving. His memories stopped pulling at themselves. His resolves are solid once again. He looks towards the class and begins to smile, a fist readying itself as the entire class gets itself ready for combat. Before Izuku could do anything, a warp gate appears behind him and a hand reaches to grab Izuku. DK, you know. Bakugo tried using his explosions but stopped, remembering the pain and wounds he has. He attempts to run towards the warp gate but he sees Deku disappear, leaving everyone stranded on the beach. The scream of despair echoes through the beach, reaching to the moon that had risen from the horizon. Bakugo's cries of defeat reaches even the stars. Can't believe we had to come and rescue your ass. Silence. The sound of scratching begun. Now we're going to have to take privileges away from you, Izuku. Tamura sat in front of Izuku. The boy was looking at the ground, frowning as he gripped the sofa cushion. Are you even listening right now? Tamura reached out with all of his fingers to Izuku's face, but found that the boy didn't block or move away. 4 of his fingers rested on his face, his pinky out. What the fuck is wrong with you? Tamura frowned himself, finally catching Izuku's eyes. I'm pissed, sorry, I got carried away. The feeling of disappointment had spread across Izuku's mind, causing him to feel like he needed to punish himself for it. I can't be reckless anymore, I'm mad at myself, he added. Tamura retracted his fingers. Oh, shut the fuck up, you're fine. Go get some sleep, we'll talk more later. Tamura huffed angrily, standing up as he grabbed a hold of the boy's arm and forced him to stand. Izuku only moved towards the door before Tamura followed. Stop moping, you baby. Do you need me to tuck you in? The mocking sarcasm was met with a snort and then a laugh. Tamura watched as Izuku smiled to him. Good. He was still his. The scolding Bakugo received had fallen on deaf ears. Aizawa made his attempts, but found it futile and stopped, leaving him in the care of his classmates. There was nothing he could say to make the situation better, and reprimanding him would probably make things worse. After all, anyone in his place would have done the same thing, himself included. His face was sullen, looking down at the ground as he sat on one of the common room's couches. His hands were wrapped in bandages which gave Bakugo a sick feeling curling, and his other classmates were around him, though all scattered to other sofas and even to the kitchen to give him space. Only Kirishima had sat on the floor in front of him, looking at Bakugo in the eyes. I know you didn't want help, but you gotta listen to us, man. You can't do this alone. Kirishima's words seemed to have traveled through empty space. Everyone's worrying faces watched Bakugo and any reactions he would give. I know how it feels to seek vengeance and become fueled by your own personal agenda. That was Ada's voice. His hand was placed onto Bakugo's shoulder. He didn't move to shrug it off. If we all band together, we can save him. The optimism in Uraraka's voice didn't help the situation. More voices tried to reassure Bakugo, but everything bounced off of him. It wasn't until Todoroki spoke. Did you see his eyes? Bakugo looked up at the other boy, finally giving some sort of reaction. I saw tears. Before Kirishima and I had gotten there, he must have been crying. What did you see? All eyes went back to Bakugo. Truth be told, the boy felt anxious having everyone waiting for his response. It was different than when he declared his victories over speakers or when he threatened his classmates. The words lumped up in Bakugo's throat. He looked like he was calling for help. A gasp from Uraraka pierced through the room. That means he's still in there. He's calling out for help. Bakugo. She moved closer to him, her fists balled up. He's not gone. Bakugo remained silent. Even so, what the fuck could he do? He was stuck to the ground, unable to do anything. Even with pleading eyes, Bakugo still wasn't able to save him. He was a failure, a weakling that couldn't do anything even if it was presented right in front of him. He was useless, dead in the water, a waste of space, nothing more than a Bakugo. Todoroki's voice chilled the air. Do you think Midoriya had made it this far all by himself? Everyone turned to look at him. He didn't just rely on his own strength, but he had help along the way and cherished the bonds he created. If it wasn't for him reaching out to me, I would have never been able to forgive myself. Bakugo recalled the moment in between the cavalry battle and the final tournament during the sports festival. He remembered hearing about Todoroki's past. He reached out to me and helped me, so I'll do the same to you. Todoroki held out his hand. You want to save him, but so do we. You put all this burden on yourself when you didn't have to. You think that this is a path only you can take, but that's not true. Let us walk with you. Let's save him. Bakugo stared at Todoroki, seeing the resolve in his eyes. That fucking idiot. Always going around and saving people when they weren't asking for it. He took a hold of the boy's hand, nodding his head gently. Their grip strengthened. He had to let go of his guilt and fill it with something else. Something better, some kind of fuel that would drive every single one of them. The entire class gaped and cheered, moving closer to Bakugo as he kept his sights on Todoroki's. He returned the boy's smile with one of his own. To Kurogiri, it almost seemed like Tamura was postponing all of their plans to destroy the heroes. Reason? Well, it was obvious to anyone that the young man wanted to keep the new addition under his control. He spent a considerable amount of time with Izuku, sometimes talking and sometimes just being close to him. It was a foreign sight to behold, at least to see Tamura acting like that. The man was usually playing a game by himself, growing frustrated by the second until he disintegrated something nearby. Now Tamura seemed to have mellowed out, using Izuku as a catharsis for his pent-up anger and childish tantrums. Izuku, on the other hand, seemed to be fine being used as a vehicle for the older boy's desires. What their sensei had done to him was pure craftsmanship, truly something to behold. So I was thinking we can work on making a pathway towards the school, maybe underground. We could be right below them and they'll never notice. But then I guess we would have to worry about certain quirks like Mezu Shaoji's and Kyokajiru's that could possibly hear us. Izuku had been rambling out different tactics and strategies to Tamura, who lied down on the dirtied sofa, legs up on the armrest. He had father's hand on his face, his own hands folding on top of his stomach. To anyone passing by, Tamura looked like he was asleep. In actuality, he was very intent on listening to Izuku's voice. The best course of action might be spreading them all out in locations that don't accustom their quirks. But even then I feel they're well adapted to changes in environment. Izuku rubbed his face, scratching out something on his notebook before realizing he could have easily erased the writing instead. He took the pink eraser and began furiously erasing the work. Maybe it would be better to lure all of them away and take them all at once. It would save time, and I'm sure we can do it if we brought them to our terrain. He continued to mumble, now mostly to himself as he scribbled in his notebook. Tamura reached up and took a hold of Izuku's wrist, one index finger off the skin. Enough, you're overthinking. Tamura let go of Izuku's wrist, causing the boy to sigh in annoyance rather than relief. Izuku turned towards Tamura, looking down at him. Do you have any ideas? Did you even hear anything I said? He asked, a small smirk spreading on his face. It was met with a pat to the head from Tamura. Of course I did. I think right now you need some new perspectives. Tamura hoisted himself up to a sitting position, scratching the back of his head lightly, not enough to break skin. I think you've been frying your brain out being locked up in here. Probably our fault for making you stay put. His hand went up to scratch his neck but stopped himself, remembering that Izuku was there. Izuku hummed thoughtfully, leaning back and stretching his arms back. He rolled his head to stretch out his neck and pulled up his notebook, reading it over. His eyebrows furrowed, rereading what he wrote in the rushed chicken scratch on the paper. What do you mean? Can I go out then? His face beamed at the thought. Tamura sighed, nodding his head. Yeah, I think you should go out, but I'm going with you this time. A questionable look came from Izuku's face while Kurogiri made his curiosity unnoticed. Tamura stood up from the sofa and walked over to Kurogiri. "Take us to Hasu Arcade Walk." He took father's hand off his face and slid it into his hoodie's pocket. Izuku got himself up and ran over to Tamura's side. "Wait, really? We can go out?" The excitement was apparent on Izuku's face. He almost looked like a child that was given an all-sugar buffet. Tamura nearly snorted at the sight but headed towards the bartender. "Kurogiri, we're going out. We'll be back whenever." It was a command. The bartender only nodded in acknowledgement as Izuku ran towards the two, nearly jumping up and down. The warp portal was out in front of them, Tamura rubbing his neck gently as to not scratch it. Izuku thanked Kurogiri and walked through the portal. Before the older boy could go in, Kurogiri placed down the glass loudly on the table. "Make sure you keep him in check. We don't want another incident to happen. Are you sure this is okay?" Tamura only nodded his head, placing his hoodie over his head. Yeah, it'll be fine. I'll look after the brat." The word almost sounded endearing. Kurogiri nodded once more as Tamura entered through the warp gate. The boardwalk was lively, despite it being the evening. There was a wooden walkway towards different carnival stands as well as entrances to arcades. On top of that, there were multiple carnival rides that operated by locals either using mechanics and even the quirks of those operators. It was a nice boardwalk where people went to enjoy themselves. The only reason Tamura knew the place is because they had a certain vintage game in the back of one of the arcades that he liked to play. Izuku stood next to him, dressed like any other teenager who was going out for a night of fun with friends. A plain hoodie and t-shirt and jeans. No one knew that the two of them were villains, people who sought to end the age of heroes. The green-haired boy beamed at everything, taken by all of the lights and different kind of games there were. "We're seriously here, going to play games." He nearly laughed at the fact. Tamura raised an eyebrow, stuffing his hands into his hoodie pockets. "Yeah, you're paying though." Tamura looked down at the boy whose face dropped. Wait, me, I didn't bring my wallet. Actually, I don't think I even had a wallet to begin with either. I actually don't know what I've been doing. I mean, sometimes Kurogiri gives me money, but he didn't give me any now, so I don't have anything on me. "Oh man, I'm sorry Tamu-chan, we came all this way, and now we can't." Izuku was interrupted by loud laughter. Tamura covered his face with his own hand, a pinky up, but began snorting into his sleeve. "Shut the fuck up, you idiot. I was joking. Come on." He took a hold of Izuku's arm with his other hand and dragged him to one of the carnival stalls despite his protests of betrayal. The game was a simple one. It was throwing the ball to hit one of the cartoon paper monsters on top of tables. The stall had a sign that read "No Quirk Cheating," to which Izuku found rather amusing. He quickly scanned at the prizes that were decorating the exterior of the stall. Some All Might plushes, but there was some cute animal ones that Izuku noticed instead. A certain stuffed animal caught Izuku's eyes. It was a cow with a mad face on it. Its eyes were low and its body looked like it was slumping. For some reason, it reminded him of Tomo-chan. "Let me do this one." Izuku grinned, looking at Tamura. "Fine, whatever." Tamura took out a small pouch, handing the stall operator the money. The operator gave Izuku 3 balls, all of them worn out and soft. He took a hold of one of them and threw it up in the air to catch. Izuku wanted to test the ball and what material it was made out of. Izuku was about to mumble once more, holding the ball in his hand and his other hand on his chin. "Alright, so I only have 3 shots, and to win a prize I have to hit everything down with no mistakes. That seems fine. I don't need my quirk to hit something with precision. But there's got to be some trick to this. Obviously these games are rigged for everyone, so I just need to figure out what the trick is going to be. But I don't have a test throw to figure it out, so." A fist tapped the top of Izuku's green mop of hair. Tamura stared at him with dull, tired eyes. "Fucking just throw the ball." Izuku flushed with embarrassment and nodded his head. "Oh, okay." Izuku stood in front of the stall, taking a deep breath before he aimed the ball, tossing it with his regular strength. Wham! He hit the first monster. "Okay, cool, next ball." Izuku shifted to the left and aimed, tossing the ball and WHAPOW. Another direct hit. Now it was the last ball, final chance. Izuku took another deep breath, focusing on the target before him. He threw the ball. It was on the course to hit the final target. Izuku didn't notice the stall operator's grin, especially when the ball hit the back of the stall. "Oh, too bad, kid. Here's a consolation prize." The stall operator handed him a lollipop. There was a yellow smiley face printed onto the wrapper. Izuku took it and frowned, looking at the stall and what had happened. Surely it was the operator's quirk that affected the ball in some way, but it happened too quickly for Izuku to see. He couldn't really prove that the stall operator had anything to do with it. Tamura, however, had caught wind of what was going on. He was watching Izuku the entire time, and the ball had somehow gone off course from its intended path. "Move." Tamura stepped up, pushing Izuku back. He handed more money to the stall operator, taking the balls with a few fingers. Izuku was rather perplexed. How would he throw the ball with only a few fingers? He never really saw Tamura do anything like that, so he was rather interested in how he would go about the game. Tamura took a hold of the ball with all of his fingers. It disintegrated and fell into pieces of ash. Hey, the operator looked at what was once his ball. Sorry, my bad. He took a hold of the other ball and tossed it really hard towards the monsters, the ball disintegrating before it could reach anything. The stall operator was getting angrier, stepping directly in front of the game. Listen, kid, give me that ball. Get the hell out of here before he finished. Tamura tossed the ball at his face with only a few of his fingers. Whoops. Before Tamura could grin and challenge the stall operator, Izuku took a hold of his arm and dragged him away, turning the corner. Tamura was about to argue but saw Izuku holding the large stuffed cow in his arms. His brows furrowed, puzzled for a second as Izuku continued to peek over the corner to see if the stall operator was looking for them. Did you steal that? Tamura asked, staring in the eyes of the sullen cow. Yeah. The booth was rigged anyways. Izuku grinned, handing him the stuffed animal. Here, I wanted to get it for you. It totally reminded me of you. He laughed, Tamura taking the plush cow with his wrists. He stared at it, frown mirroring the animal's. Fuck you. Tamura pressed his face into the cow's head, feeling the softness while hiding the smile that crept onto his pale face. The two had chosen not to do any of the stall games, seeing as they all were rigged one way or another. One stuffed animal was good enough, plus what the two of them really enjoyed was the arcade games. The fighting games were familiar, easy to play and good when it comes to two players. While Izuku was great at tactics, he couldn't beat Tamura when it came to anything virtual. Tamu-chan, I don't think this is fair at all. You always win. Izuku pouted, watching as the screen blacked out with the phrase Player 2 wins crawling from left to right. Tamura only shrugged. Fucking get better. That left Izuku with an even deeper pout. When was the last time we played an arcade game together? Izuku tapped his chin, thinking back in his memory bank. Tamura stiffened up, knowing that he wouldn't have an answer to that since it's never happened before. Shut up. Stop being a sore loser, let's play something else. Tamura reached up to scratch his neck before Izuku slapped his hand down. Want to play Dance Dance Revolution? Izuku pointed, his face beaming. No. Tamura began moving to the opposite direction of the dance machine before Izuku tugged at his arm and pulled him towards it. Tamura kept his stance wide, keeping himself grounded. No, he did not want to play DDR. Izuku continued to pull, coming to a standstill as Tamura was ready to slide onto the ground to prevent the other from dragging him. All of a sudden, Izuku had lifted Tamura by his midsection, carrying him over to the DDR machine. He placed the villain on the right side while he threw quarters into the machine. Tamura stood there frozen in place, the cow sitting in front next to the machine as he stared at the song selection screen. He was ready to turn and walk the fuck away but saw Izuku bouncing up and down, stretching his legs on his side of the machine. If Tamura left him, who knows what stupid UA student would show up and trigger some dumb fight in the middle of the arcade. It would be better if he stayed and watched at least. But there was no way he'd be playing the dumb movement game. A pop song was selected. Electro beats pumped out of the machine as Izuku began moving his feet to the corresponding arrows. He looked to be on a higher difficulty with the amount of arrows flying up and down the screen. Tamura, on his side, only had a few arrows moving from the bottom of the screen, all displaying miss whenever it passed the top gauge. It's been forever since I've played this. Izuku laughed, his face breaking out into a grin as he held onto the red bar behind him to hit all of the fast arrows. Tamura couldn't help but notice how much of an idiot the kid looked. But why was he smiling himself? Tamura stared at the screen and slowly tapped a foot on the arrow when it was close to the top arrows. His good and almost weren't as impressive as Izuku's perfect and marvelous. Tamura stopped moving his own feet to just watch Izuku move on the steel platform. He couldn't tell if the boy was using his quirk to power his legs up to catch the speed of the game. But either way, it was something impressive. A few other arcade passers-by had made their way over to watch the performance, leaving Tamura with a sense of anxiety on his stomach. Though they weren't looking at him, they were all staring at Izuku. The younger boy was taking the limelight. Not what anyone had intended with the new dynamic. Sensei had given Izuku to him as a gift, an apprentice, a psychic even, so why was he shining above him? The anxiety in his stomach had turned into frustration and then detest. Why was everyone's eyes on him? He was nothing but a brainwashed kid who got himself kidnapped. He was pathetic, an idiot, something to be disposed. Tamura reached over to grab a hold of Izuku's arm with the full intent of using all his fingers. Right when he was about to wrap his fingers around the forearm, Izuku quickly stopped moving and took a hold of the man's wrist, keeping it off him. Are you okay, Tamu-chan? Izuku had stopped everything he was doing, letting the game continue until it ends after too many misses. His green eyes are soft and full of concern. Tamura can't help but look away. Fuck. Shit. Every time Tamura looks at Izuku and his bright green eyes, he can't help but see something he's never seen before. He didn't know any words to describe it, but the feelings inside of him was something entirely new. Nothing. I'm tired. Let's go. Izuku didn't seem to be bothered by losing his game, only nodding and following Tamura outside. The crowd had dispersed by then, but the anxiety was still simmering inside of Tamura's stomach. He headed out the arcade before realizing what he had left inside. Wait, fuck, I left the dumb cow. Before Izuku could say anything, Tamura made a U-turn straight back into the arcade. He headed directly towards the DDR machine to come face to face with a small boy who had picked up the cow, looking victorious. Izuku followed behind and leaned down to the child. Hey there, we left our cow here, thanks for giving it back. Izuku grinned, holding his hands out, but the kid only grinned back and stuck out his tongue. No way, finders keeper. The kid looked back at his other friends, all of them looking to be around the age of 6. But it's ours, and if we could have it back now. Get out of here, stinkface. Izuku blinked, looking at this young child who had such a potty mouth. He couldn't help but be reminded of a certain someone he detested with all his being. His fists began to ball, teeth baring as they were pulled tightly. Listen, kid. Before Izuku could continue his thought, the child held up a hand and popping noises crackled at Izuku's face. Go away or I'll use my cool quirk on you. The other boys behind the kid cheered him on, but something had snapped in Izuku. He quickly took a hold of the boy's wrist, pushing it down. The child let go of the stuffed cow and began to cry out. Listen here, you brat, you shut up right now or I'll snap this hand off. Izuku's face became dark. Tamura was more than surprised to see him act like this to a complete stranger, a child no less. A grin cracked onto his face as he watched the child shrink back in fear. You remind me of someone I hate, but I'm letting you know now that if you don't stop being a piece of shit, someone's going to kill you. It looked like a promise, as Izuku had promised himself to kill Katsuki Bakugou long ago. The kid only nodded his head hurriedly and his wrist was freed. The boys quickly ran out of the arcade, screaming their heads off. Tamura almost thought he saw a puddle where one of the boys were standing in. Izuku picked up the cow stuffed animal and handed it to Tamura before standing. I'm feeling a bit tired myself. We should definitely get going. He gave the older boy a small smile, though his eyes looked sullen and dark. Tamura nodded and the two of them headed out of the arcade and towards the alley they both arrived at. They walked in silence for a while, standing in the dark alley as the sun began to creep below the horizon. The two of them stared at it for a while before Izuku suddenly spoke up. Thanks for taking me out today. I know I'm not allowed to anymore since I got caught, but I had a lot of fun. Izuku smiled softly, thought it looked strained. Tamura could only nod his head as he texted Kurogiri on his flip phone, the cow resting between his hip and other arm. The sun began falling underneath the ocean's line, bringing in the darkness of the night. The warp gate opened and the two of them walked in. Izuku had always slept on the couch since their new hideout was a small, cramped room in between alleys. Something was different today, as there was an object on top of Izuku's face that was soft. Opening his eyes, he slowly lifted what was on top of his face off him, blinking. He came face to face with a stuffed sheep with wide eyes and matted wool. He blinked, squinting at it. It reminded me of you. Turning his head, Izuku saw Tamura leaning over his cow plush on the other sofa playing an online game on his phone. Izuku could only grin, bringing the sheep toy under his arms and went back to sleep. Inko Midoriya had moved into the dorms of UA. Bakugo didn't know who made the executive decision but had a strong suspicion that All Might had some stance on it. He didn't mind either way, since he and his mother had constantly gone over to the Midoriya household when they had time. She was alone in the house, no husband, no son, nothing but herself and her lonely, dreary thoughts. On top of that, it seemed like the executives took into account that she was the only true link to Izuku Midoriya's memories. While the altered memories had recognized Bakugo, it was possible that he could have recognized his own mother as something uncaring. It was a stretch, of course, but if Izuku could build up so much rage and hatred towards Bakugo, who's to say that the altered memories didn't do the same to his own mother? No one told her that reasoning, of course, but she was already more than happy to move in with the children. The class was kind to her, always asking if she needed something and treated her with the utmost respect. Inko had nervously declined any help and offered her own assistance instead. She had cooked meals for the class and spent time mostly in the kitchen washing dishes. Most of the class grew concerned that they were taking advantage of the woman, but Bakugo understood she needed to keep herself busy. She cried often as in more than her own son's routine of crying. It became clear to see that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Inko cried both in happiness and in sadness. No one blamed her for crying. After all, her son was forcibly turned into the one thing he sought to defeat. The first time she had cried, Inko was sitting on the sofa late at night. Sadu had snuck out of his room in order to grab some sugar ingredients for his room when he got caught by the mother. She had lectured him about eating after hours and the possibility of stomach aches, but was intrigued by his Quirk's properties when it came to sugar intake. Sadu had apologized as Inko began laughing. Tears slowly fell down her cheek as she smiled through it. Sadu had told everyone the next morning that Inko had cried because he reminded her of a time Izuku had snuck into the kitchen to eat leftovers. She stressed that it was a happy memory and she was crying from the laughter. Sadu had given her a warm embrace anyways, offering her cake. Inko took his offer. There were many other times she had cried, almost always related to Izuku in one way or another. 3 times she had cried not related to her son. The first, Ada had been talking to some classmates and Inko had walked over with a plate of snacks for the student. Ada's hand moved up too quickly and smacked the woman right in the face, causing her to drop the plate. Needless to say, everyone was mad at the class president, including himself. Inko had reassured him that she was fine. Her eyes just wells up easily. Ada was ready to jump off the balcony despite the mother trying to let him know that it was only an accident. The second time she had burst into tears without the topic of her son was when Yaoyorozu made her a music box to decorate her guest room. Inko was amazed at the girl's quirk and the fact she had learned to make such an intricate object to gift her. This also caused an uproar in the class, finding it unfair that Yaoyorozu could create such a great present. After that, Inko's guest room was decorated with various trinkets and home decor the other students either bought or made for her. She cherished each and every one of the gifts she received from the students, making her cry again. The third was a time only Bakugo saw and didn't say a word of it. It was past curfew and everyone had gone to bed. Only Bakugo and Todoroki were up during those hours, always training in secrecy either in their rooms or on the training field. The two never spoke to one another nor wanted to have any kind of joint training, so they avoided each other. Bakugo walked back from the training field, muttering to himself on how often the hot and cold bastard was always hogging it for himself. Both of their quirks required space to train, so the training arena outside of the dorms was the perfect place to hone the two students' quirks. Sure, they could have both trained on the same field, but neither of them wanted to interact with one another. The two had agreed to work together to save Deku, but that didn't mean they had to be friendly towards one another. Niceties were on neither of their plates. As he walked back into the dorm building, Bakugo had heard small whimpering in the hall. He peeked his head around the corner to see All Might, the lanky form of him holding Inko Midoriya's hands and whispering things to her. Bakugo was concerned at first, fearing she had cried over Deku again, but once he noticed her smile, he stopped himself from interfering. He kept this to himself, not wanting to share how he saw the two adults hold hands tightly like their lives depended on one another. The mother settled in and the class grew quite fond of her after the first couple of weeks. She knew every single one of Class 1 students' names and at least 1 or 2 fun facts about them. Everyone, please work hard today. Always do your best. Inko had nervously stuttered out as the students headed out the dorms, towards the main school building. She was always given hugs and promises in return, but Bakugo always felt bad whenever they had to leave her alone at the dormitory. She didn't have anyone to occupy her thoughts with, so that was probably the time when she thought about her son. Usually Bakugo went straight back to the dorms after all classes were over, but today he had to meet someone. It took him a while to figure out where the damn nerd was after classes, but today he would finally be able to ask the questions he needs. What do you want, hero course? The tired eyes gave a harsh edge that Bakugo countered with a glare of his own. Shut the fuck up and listen to me. This ain't about me, okay? I wanted to talk about your damn quirk. He frowned deeply. The other boy, Hitoshi Shinsu, raised an eyebrow curiously. Why would you want to know about my quirk? Seems like you have better things to do than talk to us general department kids. The boy sighed, reaching up to rub the back of his neck. Back in the sports festival, Bakugo grimaced. Izuku Midoriya, the guy you were fighting in the tournament. How do you overcome your quirk? His voice grew low. Shinsu's eyes widened. Is this about his disappearance? The tone in Shinsu's voice had also gotten low. The mood had gone serious. Shut up and answer my questions already. Don't try to. Bakugo's words fell flat. His entire mind went hazy, like it was shrouded in fog. It began to lift and he exhaled loudly, gritting his teeth in annoyance. Don't you dare fucking do that again. He reached over to grab the boy's collar, but Shinsu slapped his hand away. That's how it feels to be brainwashed by my quirk. Your mind is lost in this fog. You have your mind intact, but your body will start obeying my command. He began explaining, sighing softly. I don't know what this is about, but I have a feeling it's related to Midoriya's disappearance. Has he been brainwashed? Bakugo hesitated. Knowing that only Class 1 and the teachers knew all the details about Midoriya's disappearance and his transformation into a villain, he swallowed hard before nodding. You better keep your trap shut about this, okay? We're just trying to figure some shit out. Bakugo's hands balled up into fists next to him. You must be desperate, Shinsu replied, leaning against the wall in the hallway. You know that all quirks are different and my brainwashing is probably a different kind than whatever Midoriya is under. Bakugo clenched his teeth, his fist shaking. I fucking know that. But he broke out of your hold, so maybe he can. Bakugo's sentence dropped. His mind became hazy once more as he stared at the purple-haired boy with clouded eyes. Slap yourself, Shinsu commanded. Bakugo's hand involuntarily went up. He struggled to keep his hand down, but ultimately it slapped him right across the face. His mind cleared once again, the rage building inside of Bakugo as he took a hold of the other boy's shoulders and gripped hard. What the fuck did I say? His hands began to smoke, Shinsu staring at him dead in the eyes. That's what Midoriya had gone through. I don't know anything about how he could have gotten out of it. It's never happened before. Shinsu's sullen eyes looked from Bakugo to his hands that had its tight grip on his shoulders. Bakugo's teeth clenched tighter, threatening to break his own jaw. Then that means it's possible, right? He could get out of that brainwashing. Bakugo let go, hands falling back to his side. I don't know. My quirk isn't the same as whatever that kid's under, but what he did has never happened to me before. He's a special case. Shinsu turned around and began walking away. If anyone could get out of a bind, it's probably him. I don't want to give you false hope, but I believe he can break out of it. Shinsu left the school grounds, leaving Bakugo in the hallway. Bakugo's heart began beating, mouth quivering. There was hope somewhere then. Time and time again, Deku had done something that surprised everyone, exceeding expectations. What the hell was that? Bakugo's head turned to face Todoroki, his own face falling into a grimace. What the fuck do you want? He glared at Icy Hot, stuffing his hands into his pockets, telling people outside of our classroom about Midoriya. Don't you think that the police and teacher are already asking brainwash quirk users that kind of stuff? That guy doesn't know much, but you're already blabbering out secrets. Todoroki's glare was cold. Bakugo's became fiery hot. You think I can stand by and wait around for some police guy to figure something out? At least I'm trying to do something about it. He spat back, keeping his balled fists in his pockets to prevent himself from lashing out at his classmate. Don't tell me you haven't been doing some kind of research. Everyone in classes. Fucking Yaoyorozu brought an entire library back from her fucking mansion to research this shit. Todoroki's frown fell deeper. The atmosphere grew cold. You're recklessly jeopardizing Midoriya's position. What if that general education student went off to tell everyone that one of Class 1 students have been brainwashed by villains? He's made it known that he resents us, so this is perfect leverage for him. The boy's voice grew louder, more fierce. Bakugo winced slightly, lowering his head. No, you dope. I know for a fact that shitty purple-haired loser isn't going to tell anyone. Bakugo glared back at Todoroki before turning around, heading out the building. And how do you know that? Todoroki called out, following him. Because when I talked to him, he got those fucking eyes when I mentioned Deku. Like, shit, I don't fucking know how to describe it. Bakugo turned back to him. It's the same eyes you fucking got. The kind that means Deku helped you out in some fucking way. Todoroki stopped, eyes wide. Bakugo sneered. That must have shut him up. By the way, I'm taking the training field tonight. Don't show up, bastard. Bakugo screamed out before walking out of the school. Just like he expected, Todoroki did not show up to the training field that night. Perfect. Bakugo walked out into the field and took deep breaths, aiming his hands out. There was plenty of things he needed to work on, maneuvering with his explosions to be as accurate and quick as he can. Also, he needed to work on condensing the trajectory of his blows in order to create a single, powerful shot. It was a special move he had been working hard on, and now he was able to work upon it in the training field. Focus. Put all the power on the tip of my fingers. Don't activate the palm. Focus. Before he could release the explosive energy stored up, Bakugo heard footsteps approach. He swung his hands towards the invader with threatening reflexes, only to come face to face with Inko. Aye, it's just me. The mother squealed out, tears welling up in her eyes. Bakugo quickly put his hands down. Shit, I'm sorry, I mean fuck. Wait, shit, sorry, you shouldn't have snuck up on me. He tried to apologize for nearly blowing the woman's head off, and then for the cursing, but ended up yelling at her instead. I'm sorry, Katsuki. I should have said something. But then again, you really shouldn't be out here past curfew. Her face turned stern, her tears drying. Bakugo was sure the woman would have burst into tears, but he misjudged the motherly instincts that overrides fear. I'm just training. You don't have to worry about me. I need to get stronger. Bakugo turned to look at his hands. Deku had pierced knives through his palms. And though it was healed up, the phantom pain acted up whenever he thought about it. Inko only stared at his hands and placed her own on top of one of them. Katsuki, I know you're working hard for Izuku, but if you push yourself, you're not going to be able to do anything. Please get some rest. Her eyes looked tired. It didn't look like Inko got much sleep at night either. Bakugo looked back to the training arena. He just got a chance to use the training field for the night, so should have been able to spend the limited time working on his special move. But Inko's face looked too concerned, too motherly to refuse her request. He gritted his teeth looking away from her. I know you want to get stronger. You and Izuku are so alike, you know. Shit. Bakugo turned to face her, seeing her eyes well up once more. He quickly took a hold of her hands. And I will. I'm going to become stronger and save him. You got that? I made you a promise. Inko gave the boy a small smile, wiping her tears with a sleeve. I know you will, but you need to not push yourself, okay? Get some rest, please. Bakugo took another look at the mother's face and then nodded. Okay, I will. You've been up every night for the last days. Will you stop writing for 1 second and sleep? A sofa cushion was thrown at Izuku's face. I'm almost done, don't worry. The young boy picked up the cushion and tossed it back at Tamura, who was sprawled across the other sofa perpendicular to the table Izuku was riding. Tamura allowed the cushion to hit his legs, humming thoughtfully. He swung his feet over the armrest and reached over, snatching the notebook from Izuku's desk with 4 fingers. Hey! Izuku reached to grab back his notebook, only to be threatened by the last finger coming down. I can't fucking go to sleep with you tapping your pencil constantly. I'm tired, so go to sleep. Tamura flung the notebook back at Izuku, who scrambled to catch it. He sighed in relief when he had his notes in his hands, placing it down on the table. Looking over at Tamura, Izuku stood up from his seat. Walking over to the other sofa, Izuku sighed and fell onto it, letting his face fall into the stuffed sheep plush. Fine, I'll go to sleep. Izuku didn't realize how tired he actually was until he closed his eyes and drifted off. Bakugo blinked. He was in his hero costume, standing in a hallway that looked oddly familiar. He took a few steps and realized where he was. The dark metallic hallway led to an opening of a floor, rubble and debris scattered about. He was back in ground beta, where Class 1 had their first hero training class. It took a few seconds of staring at the open wall to realize he was dreaming. Well, at least that's what he thought it was. Bakugo doesn't usually dream, and he definitely doesn't remember what happens vividly. He felt like he was actually there, standing on ground beta where he once fought Deku for the first time after being accepted into UA. Maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe this was somebody's quirk at play. Bakugo got himself ready, holding his gauntlets up as he scanned the area. Rushing footsteps alerted Bakugo, and he turned towards the entrance of the floor. He froze. Izuku Midoriya stood there, out of breath in his original hero costume. Kakin, he cried out, breaking out into a watery smile as he took a step closer to him. Bakugo quickly held an arm up, readying his gauntlet. Sweat rolled down his face as he screamed out, "Stay there, Daku." Even if it was just a one-on-one, Bakugo would be able to defeat Deku and take him back to UA. He had to be clever, on the top of his game for a fight like this. Wait, Kakanai! In a split second, Bakugo was using his other hand to propel himself towards the boy. He quickly used the momentum to spin his leg up, crashing it down on Deku's shoulder. He fell down onto the ground, gasping out as Bakugo grabbed his jumpsuit. With one hand on Deku's back, the other holding his jumpsuit, Bakugo took in deep breaths, shaking ever so slightly. The boy underneath him struggled. "Seriously, get off me. I'm not trying to fight you. I don't even think this is real," Deku yelled out. Bakugo hesitated. It was strange, that was certain. There was no way they could have made it to ground beta without realizing something beforehand. "The last thing I remember is going to sleep. I remember everything." "What?" Bakugo got off him, keeping his grip on Deku's jumpsuit as he slowly got himself up. Deku coughed and started stretching his shoulders, rubbing it with a gloved hand. Bakugo stared at him, looking to see if there was any indication of whether or not this was an imposter before him. His brows furrowed, grip tightening. "What the fuck is this, Deku?" he growled, shaking the boy ever so slightly. "Hey, quit it, let go." Deku pulled himself away from Bakugo and huffed, staring at him. His large eyes didn't seem as clouded or tired as the times he faced him after the villains had forced him into their league. His eyes were confused, yet determined. "Better start giving me some explanations before I blow your goddamn head off." Bakugo hissed. "I don't know what this is. I just know that I was asleep before this, so I think this might be a dream." Deku rubbed his head, then pinching his arm. "I just went to sleep too, and I know I'm here, so I'm probably the one dreaming and you're just my goddamn imagination." Bakugo hissed, turning away. "I should have stayed away and trained. At least that would have been more useful than just dreaming about your sorry ass." Deku walked towards him, grabbing his arm. "No, I don't think just one of us is dreaming. I think we're both dreaming. Together, I think." Izuku rubbed his chin, lost in thought. "I think we're both here through a shared memory. We're back in ground beta, right? That's where we first fought officially as classmates." Deku turned to look at the debris. "Shared memory? What the fuck are you talking about?" Bakugo turned back to glare down the smaller boy. I wasn't brainwashed. My memories were altered," Deku explained, his voice soft. Bakugo stared at him, walking back towards the boy. "I remember what happened, so I think my actual self is buried underneath all the false implants. It's just a theory, but I think that we're both here through a shared memory. And in some weird way we got connected." Deku looked back up to Bakugo, whose eyes were wide open. "That's the dumbest thing I ever heard, but I don't think I could ever make up such a lame explanation. So I guess you're not just a dream version I whipped up." Bakugo's voice was low as well, his darkened stare lifted. "I don't know if that's right, but it's just a theory. If my memories were altered, I wouldn't be able to remember this place. But I'm here now, which means that I'm trying to reach them. Could it be, maybe it's..." Deku turned around to look at the surroundings. Bakugo followed his gaze. In the entranceway was shadows. 8 sets of eyes loomed inside of corridor. "It's just like during the sports festival," Deku muttered. Bakugo turned back and pointed at the entrance, reading his hands. "What the fuck is that shit?" He moved onto a fence. "You can see them too." Deku scrambled to move Bakugo's hand down. The shadows stayed still at the entrance, not moving. Is that your one for all shit? With all the people or something? Bakugo frowned. What kind of almighty quirk is it if they can't help out their current wielder? What? You know about one for all? Deku gasped, fear appearing on his face. Yeah, All Might told me and your mom. He glared at the shadows in the hallway and turned back to Deku, whose face went white. My mom. Oh my god, my mom. Is she okay? Deku's eyes began to well. Bakugo felt something tug at his heartstrings. She's fine. She moved into the dorms with us, so we're all taking care of her. Or I guess she's taking care of us, Bakugo explained, stretching out his arms as he turned back to stare at the glowing eyes. Deku sighed in relief. I'm so glad. Thank you, Kaken, for looking after her. He sniffed softly, rubbing his face. Bakugo definitely couldn't be dreaming. He began to realize at this point. This Deku was nothing he could have imagined up for himself. This was the real deal. So what you're saying is that we happened to fall asleep around the same time and we got transported to here. Bakugo frowned, not liking his explanation at all. It sounded fake, something that only happens in the comics or movies. Yeah, I think it's because One for All is trying to help me. And the only way they could was through my old memories. Deku shook his head. Listen, Kaken, if this is a dream or a vision or whatever, then I have to tell you something. Bakugo's mouth twitched. He still wasn't happy at all about what was transpiring, but if this was the real Deku asking for help, it was something he had to listen to. They've altered my memories, but right now I remember everything, even what's happening with me and the villains. I'm making a strategy, but I'm not finished. I just know that the villains, Deku gulped, and me, are going to try and take all of Class 1 down. Deku's eyes watered while Bakugo's widened. Do you know when? Or how? Tears began rolling down Deku's cheeks. His hands clenched into fists, pulling at his jumpsuit. I don't know when, but I know that it's going to involve Nomus and using all your quirk's weaknesses, maybe even pitting all of you against each other. Similar to how Final Exam was, we're going to try to spread everyone out and pair people with the least compatibility. He shook his head. Deku began to tremble. I am so sorry. I was weak. I couldn't snap out of their hold, and now I'm helping them hurt all of you. Tears fell from his face. The pain in his chest grew as Deku fell to his knees in front of Bakugo. If I had known they would use me against all of you, I would have tried to let them kill me first. Bakugo took a hold of the jumpsuit once more, bringing Deku up to force him to look. Shut up. You're not weak, you got that. So what if you got manipulated or whatever? We're going to get you back. The fire in Bakugo's eyes were apparent. Deku stared at him as more tears slowly slid down his cheek. You listen up, nerd, and you listen good. Even if it takes me the rest of my goddamn life, I'm going to rescue you, got that? Determination rose, though Bakugo began trembling himself. It's my fucking fault this is happening. So I swear, I'm going to save you. The sincerity in his voice was something Deku had never heard before. It was almost too foreign for him to take seriously. Bits of pieces began to click in Deku's mind, causing him to share a shaky smile. Right, you're right, Kaken. Deku used his shoulder to wipe his tears away. Fucking crybaby. Bakugo let go of the jumpsuit, turning away to not show his own glistening eyes. Kaken, I'm leaving it to you, okay? I don't know when the next time we can meet like this is, but if I never see you again until I'm rescued, then, well, I'm counting on you. Deku stepped back, taking a deep breath, and smiled brightly at Bakugo. The boy scoffed, returning with a smirk of his own. Just wait, you'll be back to your dumb, annoying brat self in no time. Deku muttered a thank you, smiling through his teary eyes. Bakugo shot up from his bed, sweat clinging to his skin as threw off his blanket. He looked at his balcony door, seeing the sun slowly peeking up over the horizon. Taking a second, Bakugo tried to recall everything. To his surprise, it was as vivid as could be. He remembered everything. Throwing himself out of his bed, he raced out of his room and into the hall. He had to tell All Might, his classmates even. The real Deku was still inside, buried deep down in all of the altered memories. He reached out. He was fighting back. There is hope. Izuku woke up abruptly. He felt a sharp pain in his shoulder and back, but dismissed it as the usual soreness he got from sleeping on a sofa. It was another dreamless night, or at least nothing he remembered. Sitting up in his makeshift couch bed, he yawned, reaching up to rub his eyes. He was surprised to find that there were tears in them. The first person Bakugo told about the dream was All Might. It was only fitting, since he might have more insight on what had transpired and if One for All was playing any part in keeping Izuku from losing himself. He caught the man in the hallway on the way to the teacher's lawn. It was still early, too early for any student to be out and about. On top of that, Bakugo's face had looked too serious and almost desperate for All Might to give any second thoughts. The previous number one hero sat Bakugo down in the teacher's long sofa and made him some green tea. All Might sat down in front of him, listening to the boy's explanation on what had occurred during the night. During the dream, my boy, are you certain it was young Midoriya? All Might's face looked too serious, almost grim. I swear to you it was. There's no way I could have imagined up a dumb explanation like that. On top of that, I think I saw the other users of One for All," Bakugo added, gripping the cup of tea in his hands. "There was 8 people hidden in the hallway. I could see their eyes but not their bodies. One of them, I think, looked like you." All Might leaned back on his chair, hands folded on his lap. He took a deep breath. "There's no doubt about it then. That was One for All." He described it almost exactly the same way young Midoriya had before. The retired hero leaned in, looking directly in Bakugo's eyes. "Young Bakugo, you've found out something incredibly important. Not only do we know Midoriya is still inside his trapped memories, but we know a bit of their plan and can prepare accordingly." Hearing it from All Might made Bakugo's lip quiver. The sense of relief he was feeling in that moment was unimaginable. Not something you could measure or describe with words. In the back of his mind, Bakugo was afraid that his dream was nothing more than just that. Not a vision or a plea for help. Now that he's explained it to All Might, the burden was slowly falling off his shoulders. "We should tell Aizawa-sensei and everyone else." Bakugo got up from his seat, nearly dropping his cup of green tea. All Might nodded his head, getting up as well and checking the time of the wall clock. "It's nearly time for everyone to get up anyways. We can wake them up early and have a class meeting. Let's go, young Bakugo." All Might held an arm out for Bakugo, patting his back as he walked over. The boy felt a tremendous amount of emotion wave past him, forming into tears in his eyes. He quickly took an arm and rubbed them away. That fucking Deku was getting to him. All Might and Aizawa had presented the situation to everyone in the common area. The entire class had gathered, either sitting on the sofas or standing. Inko Midoriya was sitting down as well, listening, and as she handed the students some orange juice, Bakugo scanned over messy hair and tired faces to see their reactions as the dream was described. His face reddened with embarrassment, as there wasn't any other time a teacher of his would be describing his dream to his fellow classmate. In theory it sounded like a dumb prank, but the severity of the situation was not meant with any laughter or mockery. Those tired eyes amongst the students brightened, fueled by hope. "So Deku can be saved. He's not forever brainwashed." Uraraka cried out, her own eyes welling up. "He wasn't brainwashed." Midoriya described it as memory alteration, perhaps an illusion-type quirk. Yoirazu had interjected while tying up her hair. "To be trapped inside one's own mind, watching your body act on motives that are not your own." "How awful." Takoyami crossed his arms and furrowed, closing his eyes. The chattering amongst students began to peak, irritating their sensei. He only allowed it for a while longer, before raising his voice. "Listen, with this new information we've also discovered that the villains are planning on taking you all down. This won't be the same as the USJ attack, nor the attack during summer training. We're all being targeted. The villains know all of our quirks, and even weaknesses at this point. On top of that, they technically have one of our own as hostage. Even if they plan to use him against us, there's no telling when they'll dispose of Midoriya." The class grew silent. It's not easy to say this, but if push comes to shove they'll probably kill Midoriya if they find themselves back in a corner. Aizawa frowned deeply, his hands balling into fists beside him. The atmosphere amongst the students became deadly, fearful. "That's why we're going to have to train the hardest we've ever had to. I was planning on making you all take the hero license exam so each one of you would be able to use your quirks outside of school, but considering our circumstances it might be too risky to pursue that right now. Once we finish this meeting, we'll have to talk to Principal Nedzu and the police force. It's more than likely that they'll have more guards surrounding us and a tighter schedule. They might even try to convince us to not get involved." A few words of frustration had sprung. "However, I as your class homeroom teacher give you all permission to use your quirks outside of class. I will take full responsibility, even if it costs me my teacher job or hero license." But Sensei Ashido had started but was met with Aizawa raising a hand. "In my heart, I believe it is all of you that will rescue Midoriya. The bonds in this class are strong. I have never seen another group of first years that shows so much vigor and determination than all of you." Aizawa had closed his eyes, the class stunned. "With that being said, you all need to put forth more than just your best. Go beyond, plus ultra." The class erupted. Even Inko had held a fist up to the sky with determination in her eyes. Aizawa scoffed, smirking gently. "Right, now you can all return back to." Aizawa was suddenly attacked by a few of his students, all pulling him and All Might into a hug. "SENSEI. That was so sweet of you," Hagakure cried out. Other students had piled into the group hug until only Bakugo remained. Even Todoroki had been pulled in by Eda, though it didn't seem like he wanted to pull away at the moment. Bakugo frowned deeply, unsure on how to handle all of this until Shiro and Kirishima looked at him. "Semir Bakugou," Shiro yelled out, using his tape to pull the boy into the group hug. Kirishima wrangled Bakugo's shoulders with his arm, pulling him into the entire class hug. He grumbled loudly, muttering curses, but finally gave him. He held his arms out, placing them on Shiro and Kirishima's back as he kept his head low, listening to Aizawa's yells of complaints and All Might's laughter. Bakugo had tried sleeping at the same time as the night before in order to meet up with Deku, at least just once more. Maybe he'd have more information about the possible attack. But every time he tried to go to sleep, it never came to another meeting. He tried falling asleep at different times, but still led to no other meeting. He started to believe that the next time he'd see Deku was during the attack. The class had been given orders to always stay together, at least in groups of 2 or 3 to be safe. Each student had formed their own little buddy systems and began training with each other either during hero practice and even in their own free time, with the warning that the attack was going to try to separate everyone by quirk and weaknesses. The students of Class 1 had all worked on picking up their endurance as well as figuring out possible counters to any outcome. It was interesting to see different pairings form as a result. Bakugo saw Asui talking with Todoroki about how she fared in fire, and asked for his help creating a simulation where she would figure out how to work in flames. Aoyama and Uraraka had planned a competition amongst each other to work on their quirk limits. Whoever would get a stomachache, nauseous first would have to make the other person dinner for the day. Students all went to Anjiro for martial arts training, and others went to Yaoyorozu to get her to create some training dummies as well. Even Kaminari had gone to the support class and asked for some tech that could help him regulate the direction of his electricity. Everyone was working to push their limits, to break their current weaknesses in order to save Izuku Midoriya. Even when the nerd wasn't around, he was still uniting the class in some way or another. The entire class was kicked into gear, training like the attack could happen at any moment. They had to be ready for it. Bakugo continued to spar with Kirishima, as the latter had confronted him and begged for some one-on-one sparring in order to work on being able to last in a drawn-out fight. Of course, Bakugo had no problem using the hardening quirk to his own advantages as well. It was a good pair. Better than the sports festival fight, yeah. Kirishima grinned, aiming more punches at Bakugo's face. He dodged them quickly, moving to counter with his arms. He tried to land an explosion on Kirishima's side, but the other boy hardened his skin so it had no effect. Yeah, but you're probably going to last only an extra minute. Bakugo spun on his heel, kicking up his other leg to land a hit at the side of Kirishima's head. The red-haired boy hardened his face, moving to grip at Bakugo's ankle. Once Bakugo felt the boy's hold, he used his palms to explode himself off the ground, flipping himself over and using the moment of his leg to bring Kirishima up and slammed him to the ground. Kirishima landed with a grunt, flat on his back. He quickly sat up, holding onto his head before stumbling up. "I'm not down yet." Bakugo grinned widely, turning around to throw an explosion at him. Kirishima quickly dodged it, bringing his arms up to lock Bakugo's arm. He turned on his heel right after, throwing Bakugo to the side. The blonde quickly readjusted his weight so that he could land on his feet, using a hand to the ground to stop his momentum. He grinned up at Kirishima. "Guess you went past an extra minute. Let's finish this." Bakugo charged at Kirishima, who in return began running towards Bakugo, yelling out. Before the two could meet in the middle of the sparring field, a loud explosion that was heading their way caught their attention. "Yo, look out," Kirishima called out, kicking himself in gear and launched himself to pull Bakugo onto the ground, away from the explosion. The two of them coughed, the dirt from the ground shifting into puffs of brown clouds around them. They quickly got up, readying themselves. Was it the time? Were the villains here? Kirishima. Bakugou. Ida ran towards them, an arm up in his signature robotic fashion. "So sorry. Yaoyorozu is working on creating new types of cannons and explosions with her quirk. We've also been learning to dodge the speed, and I accidentally kicked one of the explosions over here. Is anyone hurt?" Bakugo shoved Kirishima off him, standing up, and then grabbed the hardened boy by the hair and hoisted him onto his feet. "We're fucking fine. Better watch it, Four Eyes. Anyone else other than us and we would have been blown up." Bakugo had an ugly look on his face, but Kirishima was staring at him with glimmering eyes. "Oh my god, Ada, did you hear that? He basically said I was strong." Kirishima held onto his face, Ada bowing his head deeply. "Again, apologies." Ada moved up from his bow and then bowed once more. Then again. Then he got up and left back to the group he was training with. Bakugo huffed, turning to see Kirishima still ogling at him. "What the fuck do you want, hairs for brains?" he screamed, trying to slam his hand against the boy's face to make an explosion. Kirishima ducked, dodging the attack, but kept his smiling face of admiration and pride on his face. "You think I'm getting better?" Kirishima batted his eyelashes. It was met with a huff from Bakugo and his other hand throwing down onto Kirishima's face. "Of course, you idiot. Everyone here's working their asses off. You got me off guard for a second too, so I guess you're improving." Bakugo pushed Kirishima's face away from him, shoving his hands into his pockets after. "Right on. At this rate, we'll get back Midoriya for sure." Kirishima threw a fist into the air, grinning brightly. Bakugo turned away, but he wasn't angry or upset about Kirishima's exclamation. It was true. The entire Class 1 was improving themselves at such an incredible speed. Not only had that, but they all done so while bonding. It was true what Aizawa-sensei had said about the class. They were strong, but they were strongest together. It was cheesy for sure. Bakugo would never admit it, but he felt a part of the class's strength. The sound of wheels were heard coming towards them. Inko Midoriya had a small trolley of water bottles behind her, but she wasn't pushing it. Instead, she was pulling the trolley with her quirk. Even she was working hard to exercise her own powers and exceed past her limits. It didn't seem like she was having too much trouble, but the trolley moved at a slower pace than normal. "Hi boys, here, take some water bottles." She pulled the water bottles from the trolley towards her, taking a hold of them and handed them to Bakugo and Kirishima. "Thank you, Mrs. Midoriya." Kirishima bowed his head and took the water bottle, opening it and began chugging. Bakugo took the water bottle and nodded at her, feeling a bit relaxed seeing the mother work so hard. He noted that she hadn't cried in a while, not even when they discussed the dream Bakugo had, nor did she ask about it afterwards. Instead, it looked like she was given a new set of motivation and drive, visible physically and through her work ethics. Inko didn't want to stand aside anymore, not wanting to worry or fret like she had done before. Instead, she sought to be of use to the people that were going to help save her son. Bakugo always knew her as a fiercely protective and loving mother. Whenever he was over at the Midoriyas as a child, she loved to pick up her son and fly him around, showering him with kisses. A mother's love could reach even the stars and was more powerful than any quirk. At least that's what it seemed to Bakugo in that moment. It only strengthened his desire to fulfill the promise he made to her. Toshinori Yagi walked into the high-tech prison hallway with 2 guards behind him. He had wanted to come sooner, but with the situation happening with Izuku Midoriya in Class 1A, it was nearly impossible to make time or set aside the emotions that were still reeling inside him. After confiding in Gran Torino, Toshinori felt like he was resolved enough to confront All for One. He had to find out, even if it would be difficult. He needed to know how to save young Midoriya. He sat in a chair, wearing one of his All Might hero outfits despite the size being too big for his true form. In front of him was a glass wall, and beyond that was All for One, strapped against a chair. Next to the chair was tubes and bars that kept him alive. Bright lights illuminated the room, but it felt a lot darker of an atmosphere. This place, All Might, One for All, began, knowing that the retired hero was sitting in front of him. "It's quite stiff. Let's say I have an itch on my back. If I were to move to scratch it, the guns will point at me. My vitals, my brain waves, all monitored at all times. If you so much as think about activating your quirk, their hands will already be gripped around your throat." Toshinori didn't budge. He didn't care for small talk at the moment. They modeled it after a Greek legend. They call it Tartarus. It is the name of the god of hell. Quite fitting that the fate of those who betray the gods have befallen me. Toshinori's gaze pierced through the wall, despite the man before him being unable to see. "What kind of quirk did you use on young Midoriya?" He wanted to get straight to the point. He wasn't there for idle chit-chat. "Of course you'd be here to ask me that, but what about young Tamura? After all, he is the blood relative of your dear master, my successor, and yours, working in tandem. Quite troubling, is it not? I could only imagine how you must be feeling." Toshinori kept his composure. Even if the villain was the grandson of his master, none of that mattered. What was more important was Izuku Midoriya. "You plan to have your successor kill both the boy and I," Toshinori started, recalling what Gran Torino told him. "You are no longer capable of seeing him as a villain. You would be at a complete loss. No matter what his lineage is, at the end of the day he's still a criminal." It was true. He was almost blinded by the fact that he could be harming his master's kin. But everything changed once young Midoriya became involved. Tamura Shigaraki might have been his master's grandson, but he himself had become a mentor to Midoriya, and he was first priority. "If that's the case, then I hope you enjoy rotting in here for the rest of your life. I will not die. Now I'll ask you again. I came here for the sole purpose of saving young Midoriya. What did you do to him?" All for One chuckled. He almost looked like he was grinning behind the bandages. "You've lost, All Might. Even if you survive, that boy will never be the same. I haven't had a proper conversation in years, so I might just indulge you on some hints." Toshinori frowned. "We know that you've used a memory-altering quirk. Just what did you alter?" he asked, taking a deep breath to keep his composure. "Ah, so you found out that much. Interesting. I didn't change much actually. You see, children can be quite cruel." All for One chuckled again. "I saw his memories, so I know about how you two met. Did you know, right before then, a certain classmate of his had said some rather harsh things? If it wasn't for that boy, honestly it would have taken me more work to piece together a new path." Toshinori felt his chest tighten. Was he talking about young Bakugo? "I'll keep it simple. That young boy with the explosions had told our little Midoriya to kill himself. I went from there. You already told him that he couldn't be a hero, so I just made it so he did jump. Brilliant, isn't it?" Toshinori swallowed hard. He knew that Midoriya and Bakugo had a long rivalry, but to hear exactly what Midoriya had gone through was too much to bear. Children were awful, but Katsuki Bakugou had grown tremendously. He knew that the boy regretted his actions and was working past his limits to save Midoriya. It's a simple memory-altering quirk I've stolen a long time ago, but that's not the only quirk I used on him. All for One used the information like bait on a string. Toshinori could only listen, wondering if what the villain was saying was false, just a way to get him on the edge of his seat. What is it? Toshinori gritted his teeth. What? No please. At that, Toshinori got up, moving to leave. I don't have time for this. You're bluffing regardless. Have fun rotting in here forever. Before Toshinori could step away, All for One quickly interjected. Wait. I have more to say. The villain wanted to get his plan out. He wanted to hear Toshinori's shock. I'll tell you what it is. Toshinori turned back around, readying himself. About half the class were sitting in the common rooms, either playing card games or just talking. The other half of the students were in the kitchen grabbing snacks and choosing movies. They all had made a consensus to have a night off of training and have something similar to a movie, game night. Most of the girls had all convinced Satu to bake something for the night, and he presented everyone with a scrumptious sponge cake. Everyone had gotten a piece for the night. And while Bakugo wasn't one to eat sweets, it wasn't half bad. Bakugo watched as Todoroki teamed up with Ida face off against Denki, who was teamed up with Kuda in a game of charades. Ida's wild hand gestures had confused Icy Hot, who couldn't decipher which hand movements were a part of the hints and which ones were just Ida being himself. Kuda, on the other hand, was pretty good at charades. It was the electric dummy that wasn't able to decipher the well-thought-out clues given to him. Jiru had brought out an acoustic guitar and was showing Takoyami and Sira the chords to an easy song. She strummed a few of the chords for them, bobbing her head to the tune. Other classmates were talking and eating cakes. Someone had finally decided on what movie for them to watch. Hagakure and Ashido both voted on watching a classic Disney movie and moved to put it in. Before they could put the movie in, all the lights had gone out. Everyone's first response was to look at Kaminari, but once he faced his classmates with a serious face, they all got up. The emergency lights started flashing red against the walls. Intruders on campus. This is not a drill. Intruders on campus. Ida was the first to raise his arm. Class 1A. We have intruders on the campus and they're most likely the villains. Prepare yourselves. Stay in groups. Ida looked over to his classmates. First, we need to make sure Mrs. Midoriya is safe. Satu and Shaoji had both paired up to go check on Inko in her room. The rest of the class headed towards the front to see the commotion that was brought into the UA campus. Bakugo raced through the gates, stopping when they saw a lone person walking through the pathway, security guard bodies on the floor. From the looks of it, they were only pinned down and not dead. Despite it being the night time, Bakugo was able to see that the security personnel were all being held down by knives. The class came to a halt, watching as Izuku Midoriya walked towards them, a knife in one hand and a notebook in the other. Looks like not everyone's accounted for, but that's fine. Bakugo glared. It seemed like he was right in thinking the next time he'd see Deku was during the attack, and there he was. Before Deku could take another step, Zero and Minda had moved into action. Purple orbs were thrown near Deku's feet, causing the villain to move in order to dodge them. Zero had used his tape to catch him as he jumped into the air, wrapping around him tightly and began pulling. You're in our territory now. Come on, let's get you back here with us, Zero yelled out, pulling at his tape. A warp gate formed behind Deku, absorbing him as the tape began being pulled from inside the warp gate. Zero nearly jerked forwards before Kirishima sliced the tape off him with his hardened skin. Another warp gate appeared behind the class. Students that were closer to the gate quickly faced it, while the other classmates kept their eyes peeling all around them. The entire class moved closer to each other, getting ready as two more warp gates on each side of the first gate appeared. Deku emerged out of the middle, his notebook tucked under his arm. We might be in your territory now, but I think you'll find that we have the upper hand. Behind him emerged out Tamura Shigaraki, then the villain responsible for the warp gates. Out of the other portals came out various nomes, reaching to at least 6 in all. Other villains emerged from the warp gate alongside the monsters. The class prepared themselves as the villains approached. They had trained their hardest for this moment. Bakugo stared down Deku, who in return grinned at him. Kakin, I've been waiting for this for a long time. He started walking towards the class, though his sights were only on Bakugo. Tamura took a hold of his shoulder with a finger up. He whispered something to him, leaving Deku with a frown. Bakugo noticed the clenched fists and the way he receded back behind the villains with the hands. The nomes charged towards the students as warp portals were being placed around the areas. The villains were planning on splitting everyone up. At least that's what it looked like to Class 1A. They kept to their assigned pairings and groups, getting ready to face the nomes. Bakugo kept his sights on Deku, while the other did the same. This was it. He was going to save Izuku Midoriya. No one knew how long it had been since the fight started. Could have been minutes, maybe hours, or just mere seconds since the alarms had begun blasting. The class was at an advantage, as the villains had done their research beforehand and knew every single one of the students' quirks and weaknesses. As for the newcomer villains, nothing was known about their power. It would be difficult, but it wasn't like the class hadn't been in some dire predicament before. There was a joint goal at hand. They actually didn't have to defeat any of the villains really. The real objective was to rescue Deku, and once they did that, everyone could retreat. Some of the students stuck to their pairs and allowed the warp gates to transport them somewhere. Most pairs and groups had tried to avoid the altogether, refusing the warp gate villain to scatter them before, like what had happened during the USJ incident. The class had gone through the most rigorous training and had experience prior, so this attack, just another day at UA. Of course it was still frightening to everyone, especially since no teachers were there at the moment to assist. But with fear came the desire to combat it. It was essential to every hero to know that fear was a part of what made them stronger. Even Bakugo, who stood there at the ready, his eyes fixated on the green-haired boy that stared back. He was scared. Never would Bakugo have admitted something like that. But it wasn't the fear of dying that he had. Bakugo feared losing Izuku Midoriya. The result of this fight would end up in one or two ways. Either Deku would be rescued and returned, if Bakugo would die trying. There was no way that the villains would try to retreat and regroup again. This was their final push to destroy UAS student. They couldn't afford to try again and again. Not with their limited resources and their tantrum toddler of upper management. It was do or die, now or never. Bakugo kept his eyes locked on Deku, who only furrowed his brows and grit his teeth back in response. Tamura Shigaraki kept one hand on the boy's shoulder with a pinky up, holding him back. Bakugo noticed that the hands freak was muttering things behind the hand that fastened itself to the creep's face. Deku only nodded in response, taking a few steps back. What? Was he not going to fight? Bakugo grit his teeth and took a few heavy steps forward. What? Not going to fight me? I thought this is what you wanted. Come on, Deku, just try and kill me, he screamed out. The others watching Bakugo as he carefully kept his distance despite the threat. He could see Deku's mouth pulling and his fists clenching, but the other villain kept him at bay. Before Bakugo could send another round of taunting insults, a Namu began racing towards them with such speed it was almost a miracle that Bakugo saw it in his peripheral. He jumped back, dodging the Namu's charge while keeping his eyes back onto Deku and the villains surrounding him. There was no way he was going to let him escape. Not again. Kirishima moved forward to throw a hardened punch at the Namu, keeping himself close to Bakugo. The Namu's speed was far too great, avoiding the attack and began barreling towards Kirishima. Breaking his gaze, Bakugo moved and projected himself with his explosions to grab a hold of Kirishima's arm, pulling him back from the attack. Thanks, bro. Let's get rid of this monster first. It's way too fast. The redhead hardened both his arms, getting himself ready for any other charged attacks. Bakugo quickly scanned behind him, seeing that the remaining students that were around were Shiro, Ajiro, Ida, and Todoroki. Behind them there were other classmates who had begun fighting with various other nomas and villains. He couldn't check for too long, but he had faith in every single one of his classmates that they'd be alright. Everyone had each other's back. They would be fine. Please allow us to take care of this Namu. Ida stepped up alongside Todoroki, who had both prepared themselves in battle stances. Bakugo scoffed. Both Four Eyes and Icy Hot had been working extensively hard together to build each other's quirks up. Bakugo saw a bit of what they were capable of together. He could tell that beating the Namu would be easy enough for them with Ida matching the monster's speed. Bakugo turned back towards the villains at hand, preparing his hands. Fine by me. Don't fuck up, got it. He turned his attention towards the Namu, who was getting ready for another charge. Before it was set to move, a path of ice quickly formed towards the Namu, encasing the legs of it. Almost in a flash, Ida had sped down the ice, using the icy sleet to quicken his speed before jumping and landing a powerful kick at the Namu's face. With a hand, Ida took a hold of the Namu's shoulder and propelled himself upwards, lifting his other leg and crashing it back down on the monster's head. Ida glanced back at Bakugo, determination shining through his glasses. I'll leave Midoriya to you. Bakugo, he shouted out. The fiery boy could only smirk, turning back and kept his eyes back on Deku, who stood next to Shigaraki. The green-haired boy didn't make any motions, nor any movements that indicated he was going to attack. Was he not going to fight? The first few times he and Deku saw each other, the latter was more than willing to jump at the chance. It seemed like the head honcho was keeping him back, probably because he knew that the class would try to take him back. If that was the case, then the easiest way to go about this was to taunt Deku into fighting. That would be easy enough, but the actual fighting part wouldn't be. If there was something that never changed in Bakugo over the last few months was his over-tenacious desire to win. And he will. Toshinori frowned. His patience was growing thin. He had listened to All For One ramble on and on about his ideals, but the reason he was able to muster through was the secrets he kept about young Midoriya's state. The combination of quirks. It's quite an interesting topic to think about, don't you think? Of course, with heroes they are only able to place trust into one another, which can lead to horrible outcomes. when you place multiple quirks into one person. However, some combinations can lead to the perfect blend. I've been making these nomas to create the perfect synergy of warriors, but I was quite surprised when that young boy was able to take a quirk as well. The villain began chuckling, his shoulders moving up and down lightly with what his restraints could allow. The once #1 pro hero felt his heart leap in his chest, his hands clenched in his lap, working hard not to show any signs of concern or worry. You gave him a quirk. Toshinori tried to keep his voice as calm as he could, but the man couldn't help but grit his teeth in annoyance. He thought about what that would mean for One for All. If there was a destructive quirk, then it would be stockpiled and transferred down to the next user. The idea of that made Toshinori's stomach drop. There had been instances of self-destructive quirks throughout history. Most of the time those users would have to be hospitalized for the safety of themselves and others. Was it possible that One for All had given Midoriya some sort of self-destruct quirk? How would it be activated? The vision of seeing young Midoriya blowing up is enough to get Toshinori back out of his seat, deciding whether or not he should leave to find the others or stay and listen to what the actual quirk was. Judging from the way One for All was stalling, the retired hero had a hunch something was going on during their meeting. You're not leaving again so soon. You haven't heard what the quirk was. Truly, I believe that because he was born quirkless he was able to receive the quirk quite easily. Or maybe it's because he was used to having a quirk passed down onto him. Either way, I'm pleasantly surprised his mind did not break like others have in the past. Toshinori couldn't see, but it was almost like All for One was grinning at him. Just get to the point. You either tell me what the quirk is or I won't waste any more time here and let you rot. His brave, bold bravado wasn't shaking All for One. Come now, All Might. You're going to stay here until you hear what it is. So let me indulge in my magnificent planning. It was a quirk that I had stolen while I was back in my prime days. At the time I was stealing as many quirks as I could. Rather foolish of me looking back. But of course there would be a time and place for everything. Toshinori sat back down, gritting his teeth as he felt his blood boil. He was being played around, information being used to keep the man at bay. His hands curled back into fists, listening idly as All of One continued on and on. Oh, don't give me that gloomy look. It doesn't suit you at all. Where is the hero smile of yours? The villain continued to chuckle as Toshinori kept silent. Thoughts began bouncing back into the man's head. Worry sprouted from different scenarios that played in Toshinori's mind. He had promised Inko that her son would be saved, but was there really no hope? Was it determined the moment Izuku Midoriya was taken from them that he would die? No, he had to push those thoughts away. He had to believe in his successor, believe that One for All will guide him and protect him like they've done before. On top of that, the entire Class 1 had pulled their powers together to save him. Toshinori had to put faith in the youth. He couldn't give in to despair now when there were still people to save. Even without the power of One for All coursing through his veins, the best he could do was continue to give the new generations of hero the light that shone on him once. He got up from his chair, keeping his gaze on the glass in front of him. Whatever the quirk is, Izuku Midoriya is a strong young man who can endure anything. With the help of his classmates, those memories that are trapped inside will break through. I know of that. He felt some surge through his chest, something that he came to know as hope. Toshinori smiled softly. It wasn't the smile he used as All Might that combated the fear he felt inside of himself, but it was a smile that had complete faith in his students. There came a point in time where you just have to leave it to the young ones. They'll come through, not only because they were strong, but because they had to. All for One stayed still, pausing for a second before muttering something under his breath. He began chuckling lowly. Then the volume went up. Foolish. You think that this is some story that comes with a happy ending. Whatever the outcome is, Izuku Midoriya will no longer be the same. I'm sure you'll be happy to know that I didn't plant a bomb in him, nothing that could destroy and kill him. Toshinori let out a sigh of relief. There are some things worse than death, and I enjoy hearing your cries when you find Izuku's body without a mind, lost in his own void. The voice was threatening, looming over the room. Toshinori kept his gaze hardened, scoffing. And what do you mean by that? Once those memories break through, the emotional turmoil is going to set off the quirk I gave him. Every single memory he owns will slowly break apart, leaving him nothing but a hollow shell of what once was. He won't remember you, his classmates, not even his own name. The boy you once knew will be gone. Explosions went off, clanging of metal was heard. The entire class had continuously kept their stance against the nomas and villains. Things were not without issues. A lot of the pairings had received copious amount of injuries as a result but kept pursuing their goal. The nomas were all strong, but once the students figured out the different quirks that were stored on top of one another, strategies came to play. Black and purple flames had surrounded the dormitory, creating an arena that trapped the students. The warp gates had transferred some of the students outside of that ring, meeting with other villains that appeared from the woods. Everyone had their hand at fending off the villains. Even those who had seemed to cower in fear were actively fighting, utilizing their quirks with their fellow classmates. Uraraka and Tsuyu had stayed together, fighting off both Anamu and the villainous girl that had appeared to them during the courage test back in the summer training. She had disguised herself as Uraraka for the attack, but the ruse was easily distinguished by Tsuyu, who knew the girl too well. After Todoroki and Ida had finished off the Namu, they were confronted by the villain that had created the wall of fire. He wanted to match his flames against Todoroki's, finding it interesting to see how he could handle the heat. Other villains that the students recognized from the summer training were there as well, alongside new villains that they didn't know the quirks of. Despite knowing that these villains had faced off against the Pussycats on equal footing, that didn't stop the students from acting upon their heroic instincts. Bakugo had just pinned down one of the lowly villains, a hand on their back to keep them from getting up. Kirishima came down with his hardened arm to incapacitate them with a hit to the back of their head. The two got up and stood with backs facing each other, ready for the next wave of villains that charged at them. Bakugo, I got it. The fiery teen grabbed the other's arm, swinging him around. Kirishima hardened his legs and crashed them into the villains that got too close, knocking them out with the strength that coupled with the momentum of the swing. Kirishima noticed Zero and Ajiro working off to fight some of the other villains, using Zero's tape to round them up. Hey Zero, he shouted out, picking up one of the villains that was knocked out. Tape me, Zero grinned, throwing his elbow towards them as tape came over to stick onto the villain that was being held out. Kirishima looked to Bakugo, who had moved to the other side, letting the villains get closer. Now Kirishima, he roared out, getting his palms ready, facing the ground. Kirishima took the villain in his hands and spun around once, using the moment to hurl that villain to the side, the tape following the trajectory. Bakugo sent explosions onto the ground, hurling himself up towards the sky to avoid the line of tape that started attaching itself to the villains. Using his left palm, Bakugo moved himself to the left, heading towards the first villain that was knocked out and taped up. Landing behind him, he grabbed a hold of the villain and tossed him towards the middle of the tape, crashing into the other villains that had got themselves stuck. Zero cut his tape off and attacked the end to a rock. Ajiro used his tail to throw the rock over towards the crowd of villains, letting the tape wrap around them. Once they were detained, Bakugo looked back to Deku, who was standing back, grinning from ear to ear. Look at that. They used one of the lowly villain as a capture point. They had Zero use his tape and used the momentum of the villain's weight to capture the other villains. That teamwork is amazing. Bakugo could hear Deku from where he was, analyzing the fight as it went on. He could see that the boy was trembling either from excitement or anticipation. Definitely not from fear. Bakugo stepped forward, bracing his shoulders back as he shouted through the field. Come at me, Deku. What's wrong with you? Didn't you want to fight? Wasn't the last fight we had a disappointment? He remembered the words the other had said about the fight they had at the beach. Bakugo was fueled by too many emotions at the time, but now he was ready. Deku frowned, his hand going towards his belt before Tamura took a hold of his arm. No, you can't. Remember what I said. Tamura kept Deku back, the other boy shaking with eagerness. I know Tamachin. But before Deku could continue, Bakugo let out another roar. What? Think you can just sit back and not do jack squat? Are you useless? That seemed to have gotten Deku off his feet. One blink and Deku wasn't beside Tamura. He came straight at Bakugo, his fists clenched and a grin on his face. Bakugo could only grin back, getting himself prepared to take the other boy head on. He waited for the right moment until Zero, Bakugo shouted, but the tape quirk user was already on it. He had thrown his tape on the back of Bakugo and pulled him back. Bakugo jumped back and let the tape pull him, Deku shocked. The green-haired boy growled and chased after him, following back. The protests of Tamura wasn't heard by the boy, the vengeance on his mind clouding over. Hirajiri, bring him back. Strong legs came from the side, kicking down Tamura. Ida quickly adjusted himself to land on the other side. An ice wall emerged from below, creating a barrier that prevented the main two villains from seeing beyond. Todoroki created more sheets of ice on the ground, allowing Ida to skid back next to him. Bakugo watched as Deku came closer, the rage in his eyes evident. Using his palms, Bakugo created explosions to propel himself further away, towards the courtyard closer to the entrance of the school. Zero already released the tape and watched the two classmates pass them. Get back here, Kaken. Trying to run away, Deku screamed out, keeping his vicious eyes on the blonde. Bakugo knew that the others could handle the rest of the villains, but Deku. It was true that only strength in numbers could knock down Deku, but deep down Bakugo wanted his goddamn rematch. He wanted to face Deku himself, despite the other classmates all agreeing that they would help him out any way possible. Still, he kept the mentality that he was the one that had to repay the debt he owed the boy. I ain't running away. Come at me, nerd. Bakugo screamed back, finally stopping near the entrance of the dormitory. Surrounding them was different fights amongst other students. Everyone seemed to have been preoccupied getting their nomas and villains situated. In the corner of his eyes, Bakugo saw some of his classmates on the floor, struggling. Others had visible wounds, some gashes and others with blood. The blonde gritted his teeth. He had to finish this up as quickly as possible. He had to fight to win. "Come at me, Deku," he taunted, getting his arms ready. Deku's mouth pulled into a strained smile, his teeth baring. He pulled out a few knives from his belt and moved to prepare himself. "Stop calling me that," he shouted back, charging at the source of all his turmoil. With the blade raised, he moved to strike down at Bakugo's shoulder, who dodged. With his right arm he threw a punch only for it stopped near Deku's chest. Deku held onto the hand, grinning. Right hook still. The question was met with Bakugo's smirk. "You fucking bet." Bakugo took a hold of Deku's hand that was holding his and gripped tightly. Bakugo reeled his head back and crashed it against Deku's forehead, sending the boy off his balance, stumbling backwards. "Kakin, what the fuck?" Deku held onto his head, groaning. Bakugo winced, rubbing his forehead as he moved to charge at the other. It was an improvised move, but he learned that maybe if he did things that were unexpected, it would throw Deku off his game. It definitely was enough for Bakugo to reel back his arm and send a hard punch to the other's cheek, knocking him onto the ground. Deku got up, holding his face, and glared down the other. Glowing stripes appeared on Deku's face, the power of one for all surging through him. Bakugo knew that he wasn't a match for All Might during the final exams. But he knew Deku was still learning how to handle this quirk. He'd been witnessing it this entire time. And by comparing himself to someone who started from nothing, Bakugo had grown more and more frustrating seeing the other's progress and improvement. Looking back, he shouldn't have been so riled up. He was blessed with amazing powers from the day he was born. Deku started with nothing. It wasn't fair to compare the progress of someone who was level 50 to someone who started at level 1. In a flash, Deku was already back in the air, throwing a punch at Bakugo once again. The blonde knew he couldn't block it as the strength of the punch could still puncture through, so instead he jumped to the side. Deku seemed to have noticed this and moved to swipe his leg down, tripping Bakugo. Using his palm towards the ground, he created explosions to propel himself back up and gathered his balance. Though before he was able to look up, Deku had landed a strong punch to the boy's chest, sending him back towards the dormitory building. "That's all you got. Some punches." Bakugo wiped his mouth as blood began to drip. He clenched at his stomach and got up, seeing 2 projectiles fly at him. He quickly stepped out of the way, but a knife had sliced through his shirt and nicked his shoulder. "Well, I have some knives too." Deku grinned as he tossed another knife at Bakugo, who jumped to the left. "You think some knives are going to help you out? Seems like a cheat to me." Bakugo taunted, holding his hands up. Deku only smiled brightly, throwing his arms to the left. In the corner of his eye, Bakugo saw a glimmer of a string and quickly turned to face the knife that had followed Deku's arm. It swung at Bakugo, who ducked and went back to the owner's hand. "I think weapons are just fine as long as you know how to properly use it. Same thing as costumes, right? Support gear." Deku hummed thoughtfully, flipping the knife in his hand to hold it with the blade facing down. Bakugo only grinned back. "Whatever, nerd. I'll beat you with or without knives." Bakugo propelled himself forward with his quirk, one arm moving up to reach out to Deku. The green-haired boy held the knife up, moving to swipe at the hand that was outstretched. At the last minute, Bakugo moved the palm up and blasted an explosion, moving himself lower on the ground and slid below Deku's legs. He quickly straightened himself up and landed a kick to the boy's back, causing him to stumble forward. Deku growled and returned and flipped himself to land a punch at the ground where Bakugo was. The blonde had quickly rolled to the side and got back to his feet, though the powered-up punch had created a crater in the ground that left Bakugo off balance. While he was moving to keep himself upright, Deku grabbed a hold of Bakugo's arm and swung him over his shoulder, tossing him onto the ground with extreme force. Bakugo spat out some blood and quickly tried to get himself off the ground but was thrown onto the other side by Deku once more. The expression on the boy's face was twisted. His eyes widened, accompanied by a wide grin as he moved on top of Bakugo to throw down a fist. The punches collided with Bakugo's face, another thrown after. The blonde could feel the bone in his nose crack as another punch soared across his face. He used his legs to kick Deku back, quickly stumbling behind him. "Come back here." Deku pulled himself forward, his arm reeling back for another strong punch. Bakugo made a move to step back but found his head clouding up from the punches he received. He wouldn't be able to dodge it, he had to block. The punch never came. Instead, Bakugo found himself being pulled back. Nothing was holding him, but for some reason his body was being dragged across the ground towards the entrance of the building. Looking back, he came face to face with Izuku Midoriya, who was struggling with an arm out. She had pulled Bakugo out of the way with her quirk, saving him from Deku's powerful punch. "Katsuki," she cried out, eyes brimming with tears. His face must have been a mess, obviously enough to worry the mother. He got up and wiped his face, the blood staining his arm. Shaoji and Sado appeared behind her, moving to guard her. Finally standing up, Bakugo turned back to see Deku standing there, eyes wide. He stared at his mother long and hard, his mouth agape. Why is she here?" Deku's couldn't move his gaze away. Inko trembled at the sight of her son who was so close, almost at reach. Izuku, she cried out, ready to move towards him before Shoji held his arms out to block her. Deku's hands shook, balling into fists as he began walking closer. Why are you here? Now of all places. Where were you when I needed you? He screamed out, bracing his arm to throw a punch at his own mother. Sadu and Shoji moved to counter, but Bakugo was the one who got in front. He held his palms out and summoned a concentrated blast of explosions, creating his stun grenade attack. It shot directly in front of Deku, who blocked it with his other arm, falling back. What the fuck is wrong with you? Bakugo screamed out, panting hard. Trying to hurt your fucking mom. He didn't know what got his legs moving, but he knew that he couldn't stand there and watch Deku try to land a hit on his own mother. For the first time, Bakugo's legs moved on its own to rescue someone. Bakugo frowned and moved to prepare his next move. He kept his hands close together, the sweat on his palms heating us as he focused the trajectory. Deku looked up and a beam of explosions fired off from Bakugo's hands. The concentrated blast sent Deku flying backwards, falling onto the ground. Bakugo huffed, clenching his fists as he watched Deku struggle to get up. No, I'm not going to lose to you, Kaken. He ceased, looking up with fire in his eyes. Izuku, Bakugo yelled out, catching the attention of the boy in question and the other classmates around. Listen to me. You're a hero. He couldn't stop to think what he wanted to say. He had to get him to listen. He had to say what was in his heart. You're stronger than this, so snap out of it. Come back to us. Bakugo screamed. The sincerity in his voice caused his words to crack. Deku stared, his eyes wide. Bakugo caught a glimmer of something in the green orbs, something reminiscent. Deku, you're the Deku that never gives up. The Deku that does his best. Uraraka screamed out, her eyes watering as Deku turned to stare at her. You're Midoriya of Class 1A. You're our friend. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. Ada shouted next from behind. The entire class had begun shouting at the green-haired boy, all throwing their emotions into their words. You've saved me from myself. You've shown me what it meant to be a hero. Todoroki called out next. The entire class moving in closer. You're strong, Midoriya. If anyone could do this, it's you, Ribbit. You're the manliest guy I know. So hurry and shake it off. You've always been so strong. So let's get this done and over with. Come back. Bakugo watched as more of his classmates called out, his heart stirring. Deku stared at everyone who called out, from Tsuyu to Kirishima to Mina. He began to tremble, clutching at his head. Through the heaviest of darkness will you see the brightest of lights. Find the guide back to where you truly belong. With your strength, you can break through. Deku turned his head to see Takoyami and Shoji standing over some uprooted cement. You beat Shinsu's brainwashing. You can pull through anything. You're our fellow classmate Midoriya. We won't rest till we have you back safe and sound. Listen to everyone. Can't you hear how much they care? Yeah, we all need you back, Midoriya. Seriously, come on back. He clutched at his head, turning to see Ajiro, Yaoyorozu, Jiru and Kaminari all staring at him. Something in his heart began pulling, threatening to burst as his eyes welled up. Yeah, Midoriya, where's that super strong spirit of yours? Bring it out and let's go. You can do it, we believe in you. You're too cool to be a villain, Midoriya. You sparkle the brightest amongst us, Monami. Man, we're really trying to help you out here, so give us a break. You can do it. Just have to give it your all. The boy started hyperventilating, looking to the other students that had called out to him. They all had a look of determination on their face. Something about it seemed so familiar to him. Izuku, please come home. Deku turned to face his mother, tears falling down his cheek as his heart continued to pounce and his mind began to drum. He held onto his head, falling to his knees while writhing in pain. The entire class began to approach, concern filling their face as they watched Deku crouch on the ground, fighting himself. Izuku. Bakugo raced towards him, a hand reaching out to him. As the green-haired boy looked up, his eyes widened and a click was heard. Once Bakugo got close enough to touch Midoriya, a strong shock wave emitted from the boy's body, throwing the surrounding debris back and blasted Bakugo back onto the ground. Midoriya fainted, as did Bakugo. The first thing Bakugo noticed was the pain he felt on his face. It stung, like someone had punched it repeatedly. Oh, that's right. He blinked away the blurriness in his vision before sitting up, looking at his surroundings with aching muscles. There was debris everywhere, but not the same he saw earlier. No, he wasn't in the courtyard, but the location was familiar. He was inside a building. Cement blocks littered the ground around him. Ground Beta. Bakugo got up quickly and noticed that he was back wearing his hero costume, the realization hitting him like a punch straight from All Might himself. He quickly scanned the room, looking for the person he knew would be there with him. Across the room was a hunched-up body in a green bodysuit, holding onto himself. Bakugo quickly scrambled over to the boy's side, grabbing a hold of his shoulders. Deku, did we do it? He gasped out, shaking the other before noticing the other was crying, tears streaming down his face. Kaken, everything hurts, Midoriya confessed, turning towards him, one hand on his head. What's wrong? Bakugo's eye twitched. They've done it right. So maybe this was just an aftermath of breaking the Quirk's hold. Midoriya moved to stand up, nearly stumbling into the taller boy's arm. He looked up at the ceiling that had been blasted through. Bakugo followed the other's gaze, nearly gasping at what he saw. Instead of the sky above, pieces of visions were floating about, almost like screens to another dimension playing out a scenario. It was almost like watching a movie until Bakugo realized what they were. They were memories. A few floated around, but what Bakugo noticed is that they looked like they were crumbling. Pieces of light scattered down on the two as the memories began to fade into thin air. I think I'm losing my memories. No, I'm not losing them. They're erasing. Midoriya gasped, lip quivering as more tears cascaded down his cheeks. Bakugo continued to stare. What did that mean? Everything that the boy had worked up to this point would be gone, wasted. Every memory he had with his classmates, with his mother, with All Might, gone. Would he remember who he was? Would he remember how to speak? What did this all mean? The blonde gritted his teeth, fists clenching as he watched the memories slowly crumbled away. He heard muttering from Midoriya, and normally his first response would to shut him up. But what he heard almost yanked his heart out of his chest. Izuku Midoriya, Shouto Todoroki, Tenya Ada, Uraraka Ochako. He was muttering the names of his classmate to keep himself aware. He wanted to remember them. Midoriya continued to mutter to himself while Bakugo kept silent, his brain scanning through possible solutions to the predicament. Could he catch the pieces of memory and stitch them together? What can he do? What was there to do? The memories continued to crumble. Half of them had disappeared already. As show, I can't remember. Kaken, I can't remember. Midoriya grabbed a hold of the other's arm, gripping them tightly as he began to sob. I don't want to forget. I don't want to lose everyone. Something in Bakugo's mind clicked. He quickly grabbed a hold of the boy's shoulder and stared at him directly in the eye. Shut up. You're not losing anyone. Memories or not. We're still going to be with you, okay? You're still going to be you no matter what. I don't care if you can't remember us. Who cares? They'll just become your friends again. Bakugo watched as Deku's eyes widened, his mouth quivering. The blonde couldn't stop himself from trembling himself, biting his lip. But Kaken, no buts. Stop making excuses. You're not dying, are you? So what's there to be worrying about, you damn nerd? Bakugo knew the answer to that. What if I'm not myself? What if I don't want to be a hero anymore? Midoriya looked down, holding onto his arms. Huh, what a joke. Of course you're going to want to be a hero. Who doesn't? Bakugo laughed, grinning before seeing Midoriya's defeated face. Oi, don't give me that look. You'll be fine, okay? Midoriya looked up, meeting Bakugo's eyes, giving him a watery smile. I'm scared, he whispered softly, shivering. Bakugo took a moment before moving to embrace the other boy. He held onto him tightly, pouring all of his emotions into the hug. I'm sorry, Izuku, for being an ass, for ruining your life. His voice was softer, somber, and almost desperate. If this really is the last time we see each other like this, I want you to know I'm sorry for everything I've done to you. Midoriya chuckled into the other's shoulder before returning the embrace. Thanks, but you never ruined my life. I've always looked up to you. You're amazing, Kaken, he admitted, smiling softly as he looked up at the memories disintegrating away. You're the one that's fucking amazing. Listen, Izuku, you can call me Deku. It's okay. For some reason it seems right. Bakugo swallowed hard. Deku, you'll be all right. The two let go of one another, taking a step back as Midoriya rubbed at his eyes. He looked up to the ceiling to watch more of the memories fade into non-existence. The rumble around the two began to sparkle themselves, pieces of them crumbling away into the white abyss. In that moment, Bakugo watched as the lights of memories faded around Midoriya, illuminating the boy from behind. He didn't want to shed any tears, but his body betrayed him when a single droplet rolled down his left cheek. Kaken, Bakugo wiped away at his face. What? Midoriya looked around, the entire memory of ground beta disintegrating into pure white. Thanks for saving me. Bakugo chuckled. No, idiot, thank you. In front of him, Midoriya smiled softly before the light enveloped Bakugo's vision. The ground around him was shaking, or at least that's what it felt to Bakugo in that moment. The waves of movement shook his body to full consciousness. More light flooded in Bakugo's vision, making him grimace. So much fucking light, he murmured, blinking rapidly. A sigh of relief came from someone above. Different shadows clouded Bakugo's vision. You're awake. Thank goodness. Uraraka's high voice was too recognizable. It was also annoying in that moment. Bakugo sat up, rubbing his head and looked around. Few of his classmates were surrounding him, though not everyone. In the distance, Bakugo could hear the wailing of sirens. Turning his head, he saw Inko Midoriya sitting on the ground with her son's head resting in her lap. A few of the other students were around the green-haired boy as well. Is he? Bakugo calmly asked, looking at the other with wide eyes. He's breathing, that we know. Ida spoke up, placing a hand on Bakugo's shoulder. The blonde nodded in response, gritting his teeth. Izuku was going to be fine. He was alive. That's what the important part was. The villains are being apprehended as we speak. We've managed to incapacitate all the monstrosities and captured a good amount of the lowly henchmen. As for Tamura Shigaraki and the Warp Gate Quirk user, they've unfortunately escaped. Ada added, lowering his head in guilt. Todoroki turned from watching Midoriya to Bakugo. If they plan to come back for him, we will be ready. Bakugo felt a lump appear in his throat. Would the villains come back for Midoriya despite? A groan came from the unconscious boy, alerting everyone and gathered the entire class closer. Bakugo's breath hitched. He couldn't help himself but look over to the boy who started coming to. He had hope. Maybe the memories didn't really fade away, just locked again. They all waited for him to wake up. Finally, Midoriya blinked and looked around him. His lips quivered, eyes wide with fear and confusion. The boy scrambled up and began crawling backwards, unsure at how to take in the new surroundings. Deku, what's wrong? Uraraka asked, holding a hand out to the boy who jumped at the sudden movement. Inko's eyes began watering, reaching out for her son as well. Izuku baby. The mother's cry only startled the boy who cowered even lower. What's happening? Kirishima asked, panicked. Before Bakugo could say anything, a figure came before them, clearing his throat. I think I can explain. For now, everyone please gather over here. Allow young Midoriya some space. The man's dark eye moved to look at Bakugo, who met the gaze with a knowing look. All Might closed his eyes and shook his head, letting Bakugo know that the inevitable had occurred. Bakugo turned back and took another look at Midoriya, who looked like a deer in headlights. How could he say he was successful in saving Midoriya? How could he had returned the favor when the boy he knew no longer knew him? The pain inside his chest began to swirl, crushing through his organs and his heart. He felt utter defeat. It had been a week after the villain attack at the dormitories, but it wasn't until today that class resumed as normal. Normal was really an understatement. The class no longer felt normal. With the continued absence of Izuku Midoriya, the entire class seemed to have been dropped in a pit of gloom and despair. Even with the knowledge that their classmate was alive, after being informed on what had happened to Izuku Midoriya afterwards, no one felt like they had succeeded in what they hoped for. Aizawa cleared his throat at the front desk, gathering everyone's attention despite no one really talking. I'm sure you're all worried about Midoriya, so we've gotten some updates from his family. This seemed to bring everyone's mood up, or at least spark the entire class's interest. We've received reports that he has started talking, so the ability to speak was not forgotten. However, it's what All Might said. His memories have been seemingly wiped. He doesn't know anything, not even his own name. The class was already silent, but hearing the news only seemed to bring the room into an even deadlier silence. Ida had his arm up in the few seconds of dreariness. Excuse me, Sensei. Would it be possible if we could visit Midoriya? Maybe us being with him could spark some memories in him. The class seemed to like the idea, using any excuse to bring their hopes up. Aizawa only shook his head. We've been told that it would be better to give them space as they try to get Midoriya adjusted back to the world. He's having to learn everything from scratch, so until then, we shouldn't interfere. Ida only gritted his teeth, bowing his head to Aizawa before sitting back down in his seat. Bakugo leaned his face against his palm, looking at the wall instead of forward. He felt the emptiness behind his seat, taunting him. His heart never felt settled since the day. His mind felt numb to the world. After the fight, all the students were sent back to their respective homes to stay while the dormitories were being repaired. On top of that, the media had swarmed the area, so returning to the dorms after class was too hectic for anyone to bother with. Walking back to his house gave Bakugo a feeling of unrest. It wasn't like he didn't walk home alone before. It was just the neighborhood that reminded him of his failures. He should be glad that Izuku was alive and recovering, but everything that happened seemed to have been for nothing. This ending was too bittersweet for Bakugo to swallow. He didn't want to believe it. Being lost in thought meant that Bakugo was prone to not pay attention to where he was going. He kept his gaze directed to the floor a bit ahead of his shoes, so when a couple of guys walked into him, he nearly tripped over himself. Hey, watch it, he shouted, hands moving up to spark explosions in his palms. The guys cowered away and continued off in the other direction. Bakugo grumbled, running a hand through his hair as he marched off towards his block. He thought about visiting the Midoriyas, at least just for a second. Not even to see Izuku, but maybe to talk to Inko about the situation and her son's progress. After all, Bakugo had done his best to save Izuku, and considering their long relationship, it seemed only right for him to know some things. Bakugo thought back to what Aizawa said in class. Then he thought back to what Izuku was like when he woke up after losing his memories. It definitely might have been too soon to pay a visit, but everyone in class was feeling the unrest. The longer questions went unanswered, the more anxious everyone got. That was understandable considering everything that's happened. How long would it take for Izuku to be comfortable with guests? All Might had made visits, and Bakugo knew that he'd want to help with Izuku's recovery, especially since One for All was still a part of him. If anyone could get Izuku to remember his life, it might be the one person that inspired him to become a hero. Of course, with All Might's true form, it might have been more difficult. Bakugo continued to ponder the decision on whether or not to visit the Midoriya household until another pedestrian knocked into him. The blonde lost his footing and fell onto the sidewalk, almost face-palming. He slammed his hand on the cement and looked behind him, roaring out, "What the fuck is wrong with you? Watch where you're fucking going." The businessman didn't even take a look back at Bakugo, speeding away. Other passers-by stared at Bakugo but continued on their way. His face grew red with embarrassment, making him grow frustrated. He was about to pull himself off the ground when a hand was extended towards him. "Are you all right? Can you get up?" Bakugo looked up, his eyes widening to see Izuku Midoriya standing in front of him, a hand outstretched. Memories ran through his mind. Different visions flashed before Bakugo's eyes, all leading up to the moment in the woods as a child. He had fallen from a log into the river and Izuku had waded through the water to offer his hand and help. Maybe a few months back, Bakugo would have found the eyes that looked down on him to be irritating, infuriating, disgusting. Those were the eyes that pitied him, but Bakugo knew better now. The eyes were filled with concern. The hand was meant as an offering for help. There was no pity, no looking down on him other than in a technical manner. He took the outstretched hand and hoisted himself up, keeping his eyes on Izuku. "I'm fine." Bakugo didn't know what else to say in that moment. The boy before him gave a nervous smile, letting go of his hand. "I'm glad, The boy nervously looked around, catching the sight of his mother. He beamed, turning back to Bakugo. "My mom's waiting for me, so, have a good day." He began heading towards his mother, Bakugo catching her eyes. She gave him a friendly, though worried smile and a small wave. "Hey, you," Bakugo called out, causing the boy to turn around. "Yeah?" The blonde swallowed hard, unsure on what he wanted to say. He stopped the other on a whim. Bakugo realized that there was a lot more he wanted to say to the other, but knew that there was no way he could explain himself without scaring Izuku off. So instead he went with the first thing he should have said. "Thanks." Izuku's face beamed, a wide smile crossing his face. Bakugo couldn't help but return the smile, though not as large. The green-haired boy waved and left to meet up with his mother. Watching the other boy leave with his mother made Bakugo realize that maybe everything they did was worth something. That something was telling him in that moment that everything was going to be okay, and that Izuku would be fine. The hero inside him was still evident. The boy he once knew was still there. Even if things didn't turn out exactly as how everyone planned, Bakugo finally came to realize that he had saved Izuku Midoriya. To him, his debt wasn't repaid just yet, but the smile that he saw had given him the hope to keep going, to become the best hero that could both win and rescue. Bakugo could see only one person that could rival him for the top spot, but for now he'd just have to wait for him to catch up again. After every single surprise attack and tireless training sessions that had happened to them, Class 1 didn't seem to have much of a reaction when they became second years. The entire year had given them valuable experience of what it meant to be a hero in the real world. They've faced evil at its core. What other student from UA could say that? Not even the third years had gained the knowledge they've received, though it came with heartache. High school was supposed to be a time for creating happy new memories with friends. Being on the path of a hero, however, high school meant something very different. To Class 1A, their school meant strengthen their minds and bodies in order to one day put their lives on the line. Heroes risk their lives every single day just to keep the peace in the world. One slip up and you're done. Gone. If any of the students didn't realize that fact yet, they've came to fully understand it after their first year at UA, though they've all matured as a result. There wasn't a way to truly take away their adolescent personalities. During the summer, they had organized a trip to the beach, spending recreational time with each other outside of the dorms. The students were allowed to go back to their families for the summer, and being away from home for so long seemed to have taken a toll on a couple of the kids. Still, everyone managed to gather at the beach for one day of ocean waves and sand castles. Everyone had the intentions of inviting Izuku Midoriya, but after being told time and time again by Aizawa that the family wasn't ready, they stopped asking. Even Katsuki Bakugou hadn't gone to the Midoriya household during the summer break. It wasn't like he didn't want to, but All Might had even told the young boy himself that Izuku needed more time for recovery. The class was updated with information every so often, but it was always vague and short. Everyone had a burning desire to see Izuku Midoriya again, even if it was just for a split second, just to see that he was still there, and maybe that he was still him. Bakugo sat in his seat, his face leaning on the palm of his hand as he stared at the wall to his left. "Man, what do you think they're gonna have us do this year? More training?" Kirishima's voice brought Bakugo back to the conversation at hand. "Who knows? If it's training, then no problem. I think I'm more worried about the new lessons in English than anything else." Kaminari shivered at the thought. He might have been the absolute worst at this subject in the class. "Bro, do I feel you? Least we got Bakugo here to tutor us." Kirishima patted the Bakugo's desk which he was leaning on. The blonde only frowned, glaring at the two idiots. "Maybe if you two dipshits paid more attention you wouldn't fucking need me to tutor you," he growled, mouth twitching into a deeper scowl. Kaminari whistled, folding his arms and grinned at the fiery boy, already grouchy. It's the first day of school. Lighten up. He stuck a finger out, ready to poke at the beast. Don't even think about it, Bakugo threatened, which only made Kaminari laugh harder. More students had made their way into the classroom, talking amongst one another with the time they had before the bell would ring. Bakugo could hear girls squealing behind him, identifying the high-pitched shrieks with Ishido and Hagakure. On the other side of the classroom was Uraraka talking to both Tsuyu and Todoroki. Her voice was deafeningly loud as well. At any other time, Bakugo would have found the noise to be annoying and irritable, but the fact that there was a specific someone's muttering missing made him truly frustrated. There should have been someone sitting behind Bakugo, rambling and spouting off words a mile per minute. Maybe that was the reason why he was in such an off-putting mood, though the others inferred it to be his usual routine. The anxiety of the first day of class had gotten to Bakugo when he least suspected it. What he really thought was, could this be it? We just act like nothing happened and go back to the way things were. Impossible. No one could deny that Midoriya's kidnapping and retrieval had deeply affected Bakugo. It shaped his personality and morale into something else. Whether that was good or bad was up to the others to interpret. He was quieter, more to himself than anything else. His desire to win was still burning red hot, but there was something else in his eyes that people didn't seem to understand. Fuck, Bakugo cursed, causing his friends to jump in surprise. Whoa there, you doing okay? Kirishima began patting at the blonde's head, causing Bakugo to slap his hand away in annoyance. Nothing, just trying to fill my swearing quota, Bakugo grumbled, his answer pleasing both of the boys. While the other two laughed, Bakugo turned back to stare at the wall, sighing to himself. He was feeling pathetic when he shouldn't be. Bakugo was always stubborn, but it felt like an insult that the others were able to act cheerful in the situation they were in. How could anyone smile when Midoriya wasn't there with them? Shit, Bakugo was thinking too hard about it. He had to let go and just focus on other things. Maybe if he stopped by after school, just a quick peek into the other's household, then he'd be able to survive for the rest of the school year. It probably would have been unfair to the other classmates, but considering his strong relationship with Midoriya, well, it wouldn't hurt if they didn't know. Class, please take your seats and get yourself ready for class. Ada's voice boomed from the front, his hands gesturing wildly in the air. A few groans came from some of the students as everyone began moving back to their original seats. Ida trotted himself back to his own desk as Aizawa came through the doors to behind the desk. He was carrying his yellow sleeping bag, so at least that meant the day would be an easy one. Good morning, class. The monotonous tone was one that gave everyone a sense of familiarity, the class replying back. I was going to have you all do another quirk assessment test and compare it with the ones we did the first time, but there's been a change of plan. The class began whispering to each other, filling the room with tiny conversations amongst peers. You think it's a different kind of test? Maybe they're gonna throw us into another summer camp situation. More practical training perhaps. Or a pop quiz. I don't remember anything. Aizawa cleared his throat, eyebrows furrowing at the students. The chatter had subsided once they took a look at their teacher's irritable eyes. Maybe if you all kept quiet, I could explain what we're doing. Honestly, how many times do we have to do this? He rubbed the bridge of his nose before taking a deep breath. We have a new student joining us from now on. All attention went forward, surprising everyone. Bakugo only furrowed, frowning deeply at the thought. Why introduce a new person into the class now of all time? It didn't seem like something UA would do, especially when they had just gone through the prospects and conspiracies of there being a traitor amongst the staff and students. You already know him, so please help him adjust, Aizawa added. This leaving the class absolutely deadly silent. Someone they already knew. They didn't mean. Bakugo's heart began pounding as the door opened. It almost seemed like the entire class had held their breath all at the same time. Footsteps approached. Walking through the door was Itoshi Shinsu. Bakugo's heart dropped, frustrating him. Of course it wasn't Izuku. Why would it be? The entire class seemed to have hoped the same thing. Though it wasn't a bad thing that Shinsu was now in their class. After all, he had a very powerful quirk. It was something to celebrate, knowing that Shinsu had come from the General Studies department of the school and was now enrolled into the hero course. Shinsu stood at the front of the class, bowing his head gently. I'm Hitoshi Shinsu. I know a good amount of you already, but I hope to get along with everyone in this class. The formality seemed a bit off, but once he looked up and met eye to eye with Bakugo, the blonde quickly shot daggers. The purple-haired boy only frowned in response, heading down the aisle to take a seat. Bakugo's eyes widened, realizing that he was coming closer to the seat behind him, Izuku's seat. Don't even think about it. Bakugo's chair almost fell over when he stood up abruptly, meeting eye to eye with Shinsu. Think about what? Though his tired expression showed confusion, there was a hint of smugness. Sitting here. It's not your fucking seat, got it? Bakugo growled, placing a hand on the desk behind him, his fingers twitching. Uraraka got up from her seat, concern filling her eyes. Bakugo, calm down. No, he spat back, turning towards the girl. You should understand, right? You all should. I'm not just going to play around and forget he even existed. This is Izuku's seat. He roared back, the entire class growing somber with each passing second. Shinsu only sighed, moving a hand to comb through his purple hair. Listen, Bakugo. The blonde refused to listen. No, you fucking listen. Everyone listen. I'm not going to forget about him, or where he sat in class. This is his goddamn seat and it always will be until he gets back. Got it? If you think for a second we're gonna let. I'm sorry I'm late. All eyes turned towards the door. A panting Izuku Midoriya stood at the doorway gripping his yellow backpack straps. The entire class had gone silent once again. Aizawa only rummaged through some papers on the desk. Being late on the first day. You're already looking pretty bad. I could easily expel you for this. He grumbled, but something about his tone seemed to have not been too serious, considering he was smirking. Midoriya bowed his head and quickly went to the front. I'm sorry. I got caught up on the train helping an elderly couple to their next station. He explained, face growing red with embarrassment. I guess if you were helping someone I can let it go, but don't be late again. Midoriya nodded his head furiously and turned towards the classroom, eyes darting everywhere before looking to his feet. I'm Izuku Midoriya, but I guess you all know that, huh? He gave a sheepish smile to the class before bowing again. I was already told about my situation, so please don't feel like you have to not talk about it. I have to admit it's sort of confusing and almost impossible to believe, but I want to apologize for not being able to remember everyone. He stood up, though shaking slightly. I still want to be a hero, that's why I'm here. I hope we can all become friends. Again, Midoriya's face broke out into a wide smile, nearly causing the entire class to break from their silence. Some went into cheers, others began to weep. Bakugo stood there, eyes widen and mouth open. I'm Yuga Aoyama, the sparkliest one here. I'm Momo Yaoyorozu. It's a pleasure to re-meet you. I hope we can all work to be the best heroes we can be. Shouto Todoroki. Everyone had surrounded Midoriya once the class was put on break. Even Shinsu had sat around to introduce himself to the other. Bakugo didn't have to move from his spot at all, since Midoriya's seat was right behind his own. He was sitting on his chair sideways, looking from the entire class to the expression Midoriya had on his face every time someone introduced themselves. Of course, the boy was overwhelmed, considering there was 20 students all crowding around one area to talk to him, but what could you expect? Rikadu Sato. Great to meet you, dude. Kaiu Kajiru. Let me know if you need anything. K. Suyu Isui, but please call me Tsu. Ribbit. Midoriya politely replied to everyone, frantically looking around as more people chimed in. He rubbed the back of his head and grew red from all the sudden attention. Once everyone had introduced themselves, everyone began asking questions. It was like a new transfer student came in and the entire class wanted to know everything, despite already knowing about Midoriya. Maybe it was the new life he got that seemed interesting to them, or the fact that Midoriya was still aiming to be a hero despite all of his motivations and support being erased. So why do you want to be a hero? I mean, who doesn't, right? But considering, Hagakure chimed in, though Bakugo wasn't really sure where the invisible girl was. Well, I guess I just really like helping people. I don't know, there's just something in me that can't turn away from someone in need of help. I think I knew I wanted to be a hero was when I saw this robbery happening inside a grocery store when I was out with my mom. Just a bunch of thugs and my mom was ready to call the police. But I saw a child in trouble and before I knew it my legs had me over there. Midoriya kept his gaze down to his hands as he recalled the story. I don't know what happened, but I think something awakened in me. I didn't know how to use my quirk since I had forgotten, but in that moment my legs became really powerful and I was able to protect the kid. He looked up at the entire class, growing embarrassed again at the realization he had started rambling. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk on and on about that. I just got lost in the memory, that's all. I'm sure my reasoning's pretty boring, huh? Uraraka was the first to respond. Of course not. Deku, that's amazing. Green Eyes looked at her, puzzled. Deku. The entire class shifted awkwardly, quickly trying to find a way to diffuse the air of confusion. It was a nickname that someone gave you. Uraraka quickly replied, throwing her hands up. Deku as in the one who can't achieve anything. Is that me? Midoriya's eyes widened before he jumped in surprise at Bakugo, who suddenly rose hastily from his seat. I fucking gave you that name, okay? But listen, you're not the Deku who can't do anything, you're the Deku that always does his best. Yeah, I can do it, Deku. You got it. Bakugo slammed his palms on Midoriya's desk. The entire class startled that the blonde was giving off such a nasty vibe right off the bat. Midoriya only blinked before smiling gently. The Deku who always does his best. I think I'm okay with that. It was almost like the class let out a sigh of relief all at once, a few snickers here and there. I don't think you told me your name, by the way, Midoriya added, looking up at Bakugo. The blonde could only scoff, sitting back in his seat before turning his head away from the other. Too many emotions were going through his mind, falling into his heart and then climbed back to his head in a dizzy sprint. On one hand, he should be happy that Midoriya was there, back in class. After all, he was the one that threw a public tantrum about the seat being only reserved for the green-haired boy. But on the other hand, the entire situation sucked. He just wanted Midoriya back with all his memories, though it seemed as like it was impossible at this point. Damn it, he should be happy, right? Midoriya still wanted to be a hero. He was going to be friends with everyone again, so why was something missing? Midoriya reached over to tap Bakugo's shoulder when he didn't respond. It's Katsuki Bakugou, and I'm going to be the #1 hero one day. So you better watch your fucking back. I'm not losing to anyone, not even you. He huffed out, turning to look at Midoriya, meeting his emerald eyes once again. Katsuki Bakugou, Midoriya murmured, fingers going up to his face to rub his chin. Oh, okay, I got it. Bakugou turned back again, raising an eyebrow at the other. How about I call you Kakin, just so we're even now? You can call me Deku since you're probably used to it, but I think it's fair if I give you one too. He grinned, Bakugou's eyes widening. The entire class almost broke into their own smiles and laughter. No one acknowledged that Bakugou wasn't looking embarrassed or upset, rather he looked extremely happy. Bakugou snorted, turning his chair so he could face Midoriya. Fine Deku, call me whatever you want, but it's still not going to change the fact I'm going to be #1. He smirked at the boy who could only challenge his expression with a determined look of his own. We're all here to do our best, right? But just so you know, I'm going to do my best too, even if everyone's already got a head start on me. I'm the Deku that never gives up. I want to be the greatest hero too, Midoriya announced, hands balling into fists in front of him. Some other students chimed in after, stating that they'll be the best hero as the competitive nature of the class grew. The conversation grew from there and Bakugou turned back to face the wall once again. Bakugou was far too determined to be #1, but if there was anyone out there that could go beyond, it would be Izuku Midoriya. After the entire travesty, he was still himself. Finally, Bakugou was able to realize what the situation meant now. Second chances. This was the time where he could finally throw away all the self-loathing and resentment. He could finally look to Midoriya as someone who wasn't trying to pity him or make him feel lower than dirt. He was a rival, but most importantly, a friend. Now was the time to finally return with payment in kind. He could finally return the favor. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.